녀석을. 그리고 우리는 맹꽁이가 아니라 펴면서 펴. 야, 최소한 너는 안 먹힌단다.
하는 일은요? 아니 뭐 얘기하기 싫으면 얘기 안 해도 돼요. 저 부모는 아니면 되지.
There is something strangely perfect about building a love story around Korean taffy. Pull it too quickly and it stretches. Hold it too tightly and it sticks. Try to separate two pieces after they have touched. And suddenly the line between where one ends and the other begins becomes much harder to see. In our sticky love, that little idea is more than a cute background detail. It becomes our first clue. Because this is a story about two people whose lives become connected before either of them can fully understand what that connection means. And that is exactly the kind of clue we love opening here at the Film Box. Every film is a box, we open it together. Although technically this time we are opening a 12-episode Korean series rather than a single movie, the principle remains the same. We are not here simply to ask whether the romance is sweet, whether the leads have chemistry, or whether the story gives us enough reasons to keep pressing next episode. We are going deeper. We are going to look at why this particular romance needs confusion before it can create intimacy, why the series surrounds affection with suspicion, and why something as ordinary as sticky candy becomes such an appropriate image for two lives becoming increasingly difficult to separate. The basic setup sounds almost designed to create chaos. Eun-sae is a prosecutor who has lost her memory. Jang Tae-ha is a boxing coach who appears beside her and claims to be her boyfriend. Their strange new arrangement pulls them into a small town setting built around traditional taffy shops, turning a situation that could easily belong to a dark mystery into the foundation for an offbeat romantic comedy. That combination of memory loss, uncertain identity, romance, and underlying danger is central to how Netflix has presented the series. But forget the genre labels for a moment. Think about what that situation actually means emotionally. If somebody tells you that they love you, normally there is a history behind those words. There are memories, arguments, private jokes, mistakes, moments of trust. Tiny details nobody else knows. Love usually arrives carrying evidence. But what happens when one person cannot remember any of that evidence? Suddenly, love becomes something much stranger. It becomes a claim, and a claim has to be tested. That is where our sticky love immediately becomes more interesting than its sugary title suggests. The romance is not beginning on equal ground. One person is trying to understand the world again while another already seems to know more than he is willing to reveal. That imbalance creates comedy because everyday interactions become awkward and unpredictable, but it also creates tension because every affectionate gesture can be viewed from two directions. It can feel comforting or suspicious, sometimes both at once. That contradiction is the first compartment we need to open. Because the series wants sweetness, but it refuses to begin with certainty. Even the visual idea at its center understands this. Taffy is comforting, familiar, playful. It belongs to the warm side of the story. Yet stickiness also means difficulty escaping. Something follows you. Something remains attached. You pull away and the connection stretches instead of disappearing. Put that beside a woman trying to reconstruct who she is. Now the image changes. The question is no longer simply whether Eun-sae will fall for Tae-ha. The more interesting question becomes whether a relationship can become emotionally real when its starting point is surrounded by uncertainty. That is a much stronger engine for romance because attraction alone is not enough. Tae-ha cannot simply be charming. Eun-sae cannot simply be won over. Every step toward closeness also creates another question. What does she believe? What does she sense instinctively? What parts of a person survive when biography disappears? Can emotion recognize something that memory cannot verify? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when protecting somebody and deceiving somebody begin occupying dangerously similar territory? Do not worry, we are staying spoiler free for now. But keep that question somewhere in the back of your mind because it is going to matter. The series also gives itself another interesting tension through Tae-ha. He is associated with boxing, a world built around reading movement, protecting yourself, knowing when to strike, and understanding that every action produces a reaction. The romantic side of the story asks him to operate almost in reverse. Instead of controlling distance, he is pulled toward intimacy. Instead of simply surviving the next hit, he has to deal with consequences that cannot be solved physically. Eun-sae brings a different instinct. Her professional identity is tied to investigation and judgment. Even with memory disrupted, the premise creates a delicious contradiction. The person who most desperately needs reliable evidence is trapped inside a life where the most important evidence is missing. That is not random, that is mechanism. One character comes from a world of physical reaction. The other comes from a world of questions and proof. Then the story drops both of them into a romance where neither strength nor logic can completely control what happens next. And around them sits this almost storybook village of sweetness. That contrast is where the personality of our sticky love begins to form. Director Kim Jang-han has described the series as a warm romantic comedy about building a love that binds two people together like Korean taffy. The metaphor is openly playful, but the storytelling possibility underneath it is surprisingly rich. Because being bound to another person is not automatically romantic. Connection only becomes meaningful when trust catches up with it. That distinction is going to guide us through this entire box. We will look at the chemistry. We will look at the filmmaking. We will look at the choices that make the comedy land and the moments when the darkened machinery underneath the romance becomes visible. We will look at what works beautifully, where the story strains its own setup, and what this strange mixture of sweetness, danger, memory, and reinvention is really trying to say. And eventually, when we reach full spoilers, we are going to return to that first image, the taffy, because by then sticky will mean something very different from what it means right now. For the moment, all you need to know is this. Our sticky love does not begin by asking us to believe in a perfect romance. It begins by making belief itself the problem. And once you notice that, one question becomes almost impossible to ignore. If you cannot remember loving someone but your life keeps pulling you toward them anyway, what exactly is doing the remembering? That is where our real hook begins. The most fascinating thing about our sticky love is not that Eun-sae wakes up without her memories. It is that the man asking her to trust him is also asking her to live inside a secret. Netflix's official setup places Eun-sae beside Jang Tae-ha, the boxing coach who claims to be her boyfriend, while the promotional material deliberately raises questions about what Tae-ha is hiding and why staying close to him might somehow keep Eun-sae safe. That contradiction changes everything. Imagine waking up and discovering that the basic facts of your own life have become second-hand information. Your name can be told to you. Your occupation can be shown to you. Your belongings can offer clues. Other people can describe the person you supposedly were. But intimacy is different. Nobody can hand you a document proving how somebody made you feel. And that gives Tae-ha an extraordinary amount of power. He can stand beside Eun-sae and tell her that there was once a relationship between them, but she cannot reach backward into her own mind and verify the emotional history behind his claim. She has to judge him in the present. Watch how clever that is for a romantic comedy. Normally, a romance asks whether two people can overcome the obstacles preventing them from becoming a couple. Here, the story begins with the couple already apparently defined. Boyfriend. Relationship established. Except emotionally, Yoon-sae is standing at zero. The label has arrived before the feeding. So instead of watching two strangers slowly earn the right to call themselves a couple, we are watching a woman investigate a relationship she has supposedly already lived, and Tae-ha has the opposite problem. He behaves as though closeness exists, but he cannot force her to feel the history he claims they share. That turns tiny romantic moments into tests. A comfortable silence matters. An instinctive reaction matters. The way somebody moves closer or pulls away matters. A smile can reveal more than an explanation because explanations can be constructed. Reactions are harder to manufacture. That is where the show's central hook becomes unusually addictive. We are watching Eun-sae ask one question consciously while the story asks another underneath it. Can I trust this man? And beneath that, why does some part of me respond to him even when my mind cannot explain why? Then the noir element enters. Netflix early promotional material identifies crime boss Baek Sang-gil, played by Sung-tae, as part of the threatening mystery surrounding Eun-sae's forgotten past, meaning the danger around her is not simply a romantic misunderstanding stretched across several episodes. Suddenly, memory loss is not just a cute mechanism for putting two attractive people under the same roof. Memory becomes protection and vulnerability at the same time. If Eun-sae cannot remember what happened, then she may have lost information that somebody else desperately wants. But if she cannot remember the danger, she also cannot know whom she should fear. That is the trap. Tae-ha may know more than she does. The people around her may know more than she does. Someone dangerous may know more about Eun-sae's past than Eun-sae herself. So the person at the center of the mystery possesses the least information. That imbalance creates suspense without requiring the series to abandon its romantic personality. And then there is Eun-sae herself. She was not presented as someone naturally comfortable with uncertainty. Netflix describes her pre-amnesia identity as an elite sole prosecutor. Think about the irony. Her professional world depends on separating stories from evidence. People make claims. She examines them. People hide motives. She looks for contradictions. People insist they are telling the truth. She asks what can actually be demonstrated. Then she loses the one archive she desperately needs, her own memory. Now, every instinct associated with her old life becomes useful and useless simultaneously. She can distrust Tae-ha. She can analyze him. She can notice when something feels inconsistent. But she cannot compare his version of events against the testimony of her own past. That is why Tae-ha does not simply function as the romantic lead. He becomes evidence. His behavior is evidence. His patience is evidence. His nervousness is evidence. His choices are evidence. And every time he protects her while refusing to reveal everything, the evidence becomes harder to interpret. That is the mechanism making this more than a standard amnesia romance, because protection without explanation can look disturbingly similar to control. Secrecy motivated by care can look disturbingly similar to deception. An affection coming from somebody you do not remember can feel comforting one second and invasive the next. The series can therefore move from comedy to suspicion without breaking its premise. One scene can let Eun-sae be completely bewildered by the strange village and the man insisting he belongs in her life. Another can allow genuine warmth to emerge. Then one unexplained detail can quietly make the entire relationship suspicious again. You lean forward because you are not simply waiting for them to fall in love. You are testing Tae-ha alongside Eun-sae, and that creates another delicious problem. Suppose you start believing him. What convinced you? Was it evidence? Or did the romance make you want him to be telling the truth? That is where the show turns its mechanism toward us. A romantic storytelling trains us to trust chemistry. If two characters nuclei together, if their banter works, if one protects the other, if a quiet moment feels sincere, we begin constructing a relationship in our own minds. We start filling gaps. We forgive missing information because emotionally we understand where the story seems to be going. But our sticky love places missing information at the center of the relationship. So every warm moment carries a small question mark, not enough to destroy the sweetness, just enough to make it unstable. And instability is important here, because a completely safe romance can become predictable. A completely dark mystery could suffocate the charm. This premise works when it keeps both possibilities alive. Maybe the next moment brings tenderness. Maybe it brings another contradiction. Maybe the thing making Tae-ha seem suspicious will eventually reveal why he is the person Eun-sae needs most. Or maybe trusting appearances is exactly the mistake this story wants us to make. For now, we do not need the answer. We need the question. Because once a romantic comedy makes you wonder whether falling in love and solving a mystery might actually be the same process, it has something worth opening. And before we follow that mystery any further, we need to understand the people who built it, because several choices behind the camera explain why this unusual mixture of countryside warmth, romantic friction, and creeping suspense feels the way it does. Before we go any deeper into the story, there is an important reason. Our sticky love feels so deliberately divided between comfort and suspicion. That division was built into the series from the beginning. Netflix identifies Our Sticky Love as a 2026 limited series created by Kim Jang-han and Mo Ji-hae with Jung Hae-in, Hae-young, and Hyo Sung-tae leading the credited cast. That sounds like straightforward production information, but once you look at the roles those names are attached to, you can see the architecture of the show immediately. Start with Kim Jang-han. The director did not describe the project as a mystery that happens to contain romance. He described it as a warm, feel-good romantic comedy centered on a love that binds two people together like Korean taffy. That distinction matters, because when you encounter Eun-sae's amnesia, Taeha's suspicious behavior, unanswered questions about the past, and dangers surrounding them, it would be easy for the production to push everything toward thriller territory. But that is not the emotional destination Kim Jang-han establishes. The darkness is pressure. The romance is the destination. Think about what that does to the way scenes are constructed. When Tae-ha behaves suspiciously, the series cannot make him so threatening that the romantic promise collapses. When Eun-sae distrusts him, the series cannot resolve that distrust so quickly that the mystery disappears. And when the two begin creating moments of genuine warmth, those scenes cannot become so comfortable that you forget there are unanswered questions underneath them. The tone, therefore, depends on balance rather than purity. This is our first behind the lens mechanism. The series is not switching randomly between genres. It is making one genre interfere with another. Romantic comedy tells you to relax, mystery tells you not to. Romance asks you to believe in chemistry. Suspense asks you to question appearances. The production keeps those instincts competing inside you, and that brings us to the second revealing choice. The two leads, Jung Hae-in plays Jang Tae-ha, while Hae-young plays Go Eun-sae. Netflix's official description establishes Tae-ha as a boxing coach and Eun-sae as an ambitious prosecutor who has lost her memory. Look at how precisely opposed those identities are. A prosecutor operates through information. A boxer operates through physical instinct. A prosecutor reconstructs events. A boxer reacts in the immediate moment. One profession is built around asking what happened and proving it. The other is built around understanding what is happening right now. Then Mo Ji-ha and Kim Jong-han place the prosecutor in the one situation where her strongest professional advantage becomes unavailable. She cannot reconstruct herself. Her memories are gone. Meanwhile, the boxer becomes the person who appears to possess the missing information, that is efficient character design. The occupations are not merely colorful labels added to make the leads distinctive. They reinforce the dramatic mechanism. Eun-sae wants certainty but cannot access it. Tae-ha has information but cannot simply reveal everything. So their personalities collide before romance even gets a chance to settle. And casting Jung Hae-in opposite Ha-young makes that collision especially important, because Netflix repeatedly emphasized their chemistry when introducing the series, describing the central relationship as an offbeat romance driven by humor and friction. That tells us something about what the production is betting on. The premise alone cannot sustain this story. Amnesia is a mechanism, secrets are a mechanism, forced proximity is a mechanism. But mechanisms become exhausting if the two people trapped inside them are not enjoyable to watch together. So much of the series rests on whether Eun-sae and Tae-ha can make irritation feel like attraction without instantly turning every disagreement into obvious flirting. That requires restraint. Tae-ha has to appear sincere enough for us to understand why Eun-sae might lower her guard, while remaining strange enough that her suspicion feels intelligent rather than artificially prolonged. Eun-sae has to remain skeptical without becoming emotionally closed. If she believed him immediately, the premise would collapse. If she rejected him completely, the romance would stall. The performance space exists between those extremes, and that is why the bickering matters. It is not merely there to produce cute scenes. Every disagreement becomes a small negotiation of trust. Now open another compartment, the environment. Netflix's promotional material places the pair in the fictional feeling world of Taffy Village in Gujin-gun, describing a quiet rural community lined with traditional taffy shops that feels completely alien to Eun-sae after she wakes without her memories. That setting is doing far more storytelling work than it first appears. Imagine placing exactly the same premise in Central Seoul. Eun-sae could move through offices, hospitals, apartment buildings, transportation systems, databases, and professional spaces that visually reinforce her previous identity. The world would constantly remind her who she was. Instead, the series removes her from that environment. She wakes inside a slower, smaller community. Suddenly, her polished city identity has no natural habitat. She is psychologically displaced and geographically displaced at the same time. That doubles the fish out of water effect. She is not simply asking, "Who am I?" She is also effectively asking, "Why am I here?" And because Tae-ha belongs more naturally to this environment, the power relationship shifts. In Seoul, Eun-sae's professional identity would give her authority. In Gujin-gun, Tae-ha understands the rhythms, people, and spaces around them better than she does. So the location quietly helps create dependency without anyone needing to announce it. That choice also makes the taffy metaphor physical. The title could have remained a verbal joke. Instead, sweetness surrounds the characters, shops, food, village identity, domestic spaces. Warm textures, the romantic metaphor becomes part of the environment. That means the series can keep reminding you of its central idea without characters repeatedly explaining it. The world itself does the reminding, but the filmmakers make another decision that stops all of that sweetness from becoming weightless. Netflix explicitly promoted the series as combining fish-out-of-water romantic comedy with noir suspense, with Sung-tae playing crime boss Baek Sang-gil, whose presence connects Eun-sae's forgotten history to a more threatening layer of the story. That is our fourth production clue. Look at the casting function. Jung Hae-in and Ha-young carry the emotional uncertainty. Sung-tae represents external consequence. Without that third force, Eun-sae could theoretically take as long as she wanted to discover herself. She could gradually investigate Tae-ha. She could wander through village life. the central question would remain in myth. But once danger exists outside the relationship, time starts applying pressure. Secrets are no longer simply emotionally inconvenient. They may be necessary, and that changes how we interpret Tae-ha. The same behavior can now have two possible meanings. He might be hiding something because he cannot be trusted, or he might be hiding something because telling the truth creates risk. That ambiguity is incredibly useful for a romance based on mistrust. It allows the show to keep Tae-ha suspicious without automatically making him cruel, and it allows Eun-sae's skepticism to remain reasonable even while affection develops. The production therefore creates a triangle, but not the conventional romantic kind. Eun-sae, Tae-ha, the truth. Both characters are negotiating their relationship with the third point. Then there is the release strategy itself. Netflix released Our Sticky Love on August 7, 2026 and currently categorizes it as a limited series rather than an open-ended continuing drama. That format changes what we should expect structurally. A limited romance with a mystery engine has less freedom to remain permanently ambiguous. Questions need payoff. Emotional movement needs direction. The information gap between Eun-sae and Tae-ha cannot remain static forever. Every episode, therefore, has an invisible job. Something must become clearer, or something that looked clear must become questionable again. That push and pull is especially important because amnesia stories carry a built-in danger for writers. Memory loss can become an excuse. Need tension? Delay a memory. Need a twist? Recover a memory. Need misunderstanding? Hide another piece of the past. If the mechanism becomes too visible, you stop believing in the people and start noticing the screenwriter moving information around. The smarter approach is to make memory serve character. A recovered fad should change how Eun-sae understands herself. A hidden truth should alter how she understands Tae-ha. A revelation should not simply answer a plot question. It should force an emotional decision. And the production choices we have looked at all point in that direction. The director defines the destination as warmth. The leads embody two different relationships with truth and instinct. The village physically isolates Eun-sae from her old identity. The crime element gives secrecy consequences. And the limited series structure creates pressure for those compartments to eventually open. Put those 5 details together and the mechanism becomes visible. The taffy is not just branding. The boxing is not just character flavor. The prosecution background is not just status. The countryside is not just scenery. And the noir element is not merely there to make the trailer look exciting. Each part pushes the same contradiction. How do you create a relationship based on trust when almost every storytelling ingredient is designed to make trust difficult? That is the machine behind Our Sticky Love. And now that we understand the machine, we can finally open the box itself. Because the title, the genre, the characters, and even the strange sweetness surrounding them are all pointing toward a very particular kind of love story. So what exactly are we opening? A Sticky Love is a 2026 Korean romantic comedy series created by Kim Jang-han and Mo Ji-hya. Led by Jung Hae-in as boxing coach Jang Tae-ha and Ha-young as prosecutor Go Eun-sae. Netflix officially categorizes it as a Korean romantic TV comedy, while its own promotional material emphasizes the extra layer of noir-style suspense surrounding the central romance. That combination tells you almost everything about the box before we lift the lid. This is romance first. Comedy gives it movement. Mystery gives it tension. And memory loss gives those two genres a reason to collide. The premise is beautifully simple. Eun-sae, an ambitious prosecutor, loses her memory and finds herself living alongside Tae-ha, a boxing coach who insists that he is her boyfriend. Netflix describes him as effectively the only clue she has when she can no longer remember the past that would allow her to verify his story. But what makes the setup interesting is that it does not simply erase Eun-sae's memories so the writers can make her fall in love twice. It removes context. And context is what usually protects us from uncertainty. If somebody you have known for 10 years suddenly behaves strangely, 10 years of memory help you interpret that behavior. You remember their kindness, their mistakes, their patterns. You know what feels normal for them. Eun-sae has none of that. Tae-ha is therefore not merely a man, he is a story about himself, and Eun-sae has to decide whether that story deserves belief. That is why the title Our Sticky Love starts working on more than one level. Director Kim Jung-han explicitly described the project as a warm, feel-good romantic comedy about constructing a love that binds two people together like sticky Korean taffy. Notice the important word there, constructing, not simply discovering. That gives us the clearest verified explanation of what this series appears designed to explore. Love here is something that has to be built, which is especially interesting because the premise initially suggests the opposite. Tae arrives with the label already attached. Boyfriend, relationship history. But if Eun-sae cannot remember that history, then emotionally the label means almost nothing. Whatever exists between them now has to earn its reality in the present. That is the beating heart of the story. And as far as publicly verified production information goes, there is no need to invent some hidden novel, true story, or famous previous film that supposedly inspired it. Netflix's official material presents our sticky love through its original creators. Its stuffy metaphor, its opposites attract relationship, and its blend of romantic comedy with mystery. That is enough. Because the interesting inspiration is already inside the dramatic design. Take two people whose professions represent completely different forms of control. Give one of them missing memories. Give the other knowledge he cannot comfortably explain. Put them under the same roof. Then surround them with a place whose defining product literally sticks things together. You can almost see the storytelling equation. The series does not need an enormous mythology, it needs fiction. And Our Sticky Love understands that romantic friction becomes much more compelling when both characters have legitimate reasons for behaving the way they do. Eun-sae is not suspicious simply because the script needs another misunderstanding. Why would she not be suspicious? She wakes without her past and encounters a man who claims a level of intimacy she cannot remember granting him. Tae-ha, meanwhile, cannot solve that problem simply by being nice. The warmer he becomes, the more complicated the situation becomes, because warmth can make Eun-sae trust him. But trust built while information is being withheld is fragile. That is where the noir element earns its place. Netflix's promotion specifically introduces Hyo Sung-tae as crime boss Baek Sang-gil and connects that threatening presence to the mystery around Eun-sae's forgotten past. So this is not a story where memory loss exists inside a harmless bubble. Something happened. There are consequences outside the romance, and therefore remembering is not automatically safe. That creates the story's most useful contradiction. Eun-sae needs the truth to regain control of her life, yet the truth may also be connected to the reason she is in danger. So what kind of story is this at its heart? Not really a story about amnesia. Not even primarily a story about pretending to be a couple. It is a story about whether trust can exist before certainty. And my spoiler-free verdict at this point is that this is exactly where Our Sticky Love is at its strongest. The premise is familiar. Korean romantic dramas have certainly used memory disruption, forced proximity, clashing personalities, secret histories, and dangerous outsiders before. The freshness comes from the way those familiar pieces reinforce one central problem instead of functioning as separate gimmicks. Eun-sae cannot remember. Therefore, Tae-ha controls more information. Therefore, she mistrusts him. Therefore, their proximity becomes awkward. Therefore, every tender moment becomes meaningful. Therefore, every secret threatens whatever tenderness has been built. One mechanism feeds the next. That is good romantic construction. It also means the series will not be for everybody. If you need a romance that reaches emotional certainty immediately, this setup deliberately refuses to give you that comfort. If amnesia as a dramatic device automatically frustrates you, the central premise may ask for more patience than you are willing to give. And if you want the noir material to completely overwhelm the romantic comedy side, that is not what the creators appear to be aiming for. Kim Jang-han's own description firmly places warmth and romance at the center of the experience. But if you enjoy romances built on opposites, reluctant closeness, suspicious first impressions, small town displacement, hidden histories, and a slow conversion of irritation into emotional dependency. This box has been designed with you in mind, especially if you like your sweetness with something uneasy underneath it. Because that uneasy feeling is important, the show wants you to smile when Eun-sae and Tae-ha move closer, but it also wants a small part of you to keep asking whether you have all the information, and that is a surprisingly effective way to make romantic chemistry matter. Instead of asking only when will these two finally admit what they feel, our sticky love gives us another question first. What exactly are they standing on when they do? Memory? Instinct? A lie? Protection? Or something new that neither character had planned to build? That question takes us directly into the experience of watching the opening stretch, because before the bigger mystery has time to explain itself, the series has to accomplish something much more immediate. It has to make this strange little world feel believable, and it has to convince us that staying inside it with these two people will be worth our time. The first thing our sticky love does is almost dare you to question the title, because nothing about its opening feels sticky, sweet, or romantic. The series begins with an image of Eun-sae in serious danger before abruptly shifting toward the strange reality of awaking with amnesia. That contrast is established immediately in the first episode, and it tells you that the noir element is not simply something the series plans to introduce much later. It is buried underneath the romance from the first minutes. That opening choice caught me immediately. Not because darkness automatically makes a romantic comedy more interesting, but because of what happens when the series refuses to explain the tonal contradiction right away. You know something terrible has happened, Eun-sae does not, and that creates an information gap before Tae-ha even enters the emotional equation. We are already looking at her differently from the way she looks at herself. She wakes inside a life that feels unfamiliar. We know there is a reason. She does not know what that reason is. That means her confusion never feels completely harmless. Even when the comedy begins, there is an invisible shadow behind it. And I think that is one of the smartest things about the opening stretch. The series does not ask the romantic comedy to manufacture all of the tension by itself. Instead, suspense is already waiting beneath the floorboards. Then the tone starts changing. Eun-sae discovers that she cannot remember who she is, and official Netflix material describes her waking in a rural hospital before Tae-ha appears and calmly claims to be her boyfriend. The surroundings feel alien to her. His appearance does not match the kind of man she instinctively imagines herself choosing. And the little taffy village world seems completely disconnected from whatever life she believes she must have lived before. This is where the series becomes genuinely funny, because Eun-sae may have lost the factual archive of her identity, but she has not lost her personality. That distinction matters enormously. A weaker version of this story could treat amnesia like a factory reset. The woman wakes up innocent, passive, completely dependent. She accepts whatever everyone tells her because the plot needs her to. Our sticky love does something more entertaining. Eun-sae does not remember who she was, but some sense of who she believes she ought to be still survives. Taste survives. Instinct survives. Pride survives. Suspicion survives. And perhaps most importantly, judgment survives. So when Tae-ha appears, she does not look at him like a missing puzzle piece finally returning to its correct position. She looks at him like the puzzle has just become more suspicious. That reaction defines the energy between them. He offers an answer. She immediately questions the answer. He presents their supposed relationship as reality. She examines the reality and finds it ridiculous. And suddenly the amnesia premise stops feeling tragic for a few minutes and starts generating personality-driven comedy. That is exactly the transition the opening needed. Because if the series stayed in the emotional weight of Eun-sae's condition too long, the promised romantic comedy tone would feel dishonest. But if it jumped straight into jokes without first establishing the danger, the mystery would feel decorative. Instead, the first episode lets those tones crash into each other. There is danger, then confusion, then absurdity, then suspicion. Then want tries to enter. It should feel messy. Strangely, that mess is part of the charm. Netflix promoted the series specifically as a fish-out-of-water romantic comedy blended with noir suspense, and the opening makes that mixture visible rather than merely promising it in the marketing. The village is crucial to that feeling. Everything around Eun-sae seems too quaint for the situation she is actually in. Traditional taffy shops, a quieter rhythm, people who appear to belong to a tightly connected local world, domestic spaces that feel far removed from the professional confidence associated with her previous life. Netflix described Ju Jin-gun's taffy village as a place Eun-sae finds strange and uncomfortable, precisely because it seems completely unlike her instincts about herself. And visually, that contrast gives the story its personality. She feels like someone dropped into the wrong genre. That may be the best way to describe my feeling during these opening minutes. Eun-sae appears to believe she belongs in one kind of story. The series has placed her in another. Her instincts tell her sophistication. The environment tells her countryside simplicity. Her personality tells her independence. Her circumstances tell her she needs Tae-ha. Tae-ha tells her romance. Her intuition tells her absolutely not. That friction produces the first real spark. And Jung Hae-in's Tae-ha works because he does not need to attack every moment with obvious romantic charm. The situation is already doing enough work. His presence becomes funny partly because Eun-sae refuses to accept the version of herself that would supposedly choose him. But there is also something more interesting underneath his patience. We already understand that the situation is not as simple as he presents it, so every time he behaves gently, the scene creates two simultaneous reactions. One part of you thinks, maybe this is where she begins to trust him. Another part asks why he needs her trust so badly. That double reading keeps ordinary interactions alive, and Ha-young gets the more visibly comic side of the equation. A review of the premiere particularly highlighted her comedic timing as Eun-sae objects to the supposedly familiar life Tae-ha brings her back into. I think that quality is essential. Because Eun-sae cannot simply be the mystery. She has to be a person you enjoy spending time with while the mystery unfolds. Her frustration gives her shape. Her disbelief gives her energy. And her inability to reconcile what she sees with what she instinctively believes about herself produces some of the best early humor. But the thing that hooked me was not any individual joke. It was the speed with which the opening begins turning everything into evidence. Look at Tae-ha. Evidence. Look at the house. Evidence. Look at the village. Evidence. Look at Yoon-sae's own reactions. Evidence. She does not know her past, so everything in the present becomes part of an investigation. And because she was a prosecutor before losing her memory, that investigative rhythm feels like an echo of the woman buried underneath the amnesia. She might not remember the job, but the mind that made her good at it has not disappeared. That is much more compelling than simply waiting for convenient memories to return. It lets characters survive the gimmick. The other thing that works in those first minutes is how quickly the story begins revealing information to us without necessarily giving the same information to Eun-sae. The premiere does not spend episode after episode forcing us to remain equally confused about the basic mechanics behind her situation. Instead, according to the first episode review, the episode uses flashback material relatively early to clarify important elements of how she arrived here and why Tae-ha is involved. I like that choice because there are two completely different kinds of mystery. One asks, what happened? The other asks, what will happen when she discovers what happened? The second one is usually more interesting for a relationship story. If the series hid absolutely everything from us, we would spend our energy solving the premise. By giving us pieces earlier, it lets us watch the emotional consequences. Now we can understand why Tae-ha might hesitate. We can understand why Yoon-sae's questions are dangerous. And we can feel the tension when she moves closer to truths she does not yet recognize. That is stronger dramatic irony. It also makes Tae-ha more complicated. Once you know he has reasons for what he is doing, the question shifts. You stop asking only whether he is lying. He clearly is withholding reality. The better question becomes whether the reason behind the deception changes the moral weight of the deception. That question hooked me far more than the amnesia itself. because the romance will eventually have to confront it. You cannot be in meaningful intimacy forever on one person knowing the architecture of the situation while the other lives inside a constructed version of it. Sooner or later, the balance has to change, and suddenly every cute moment has a countdown hidden inside it. That is the atmosphere our sticky love establishes early. Warm on the surface, uneasy underneath, it creates a world where a taffy shop can feel comforting, where an awkward domestic arrangement can create comedy, where two people can begin finding a rhythm together. While somewhere outside that little bubble exists, the reason the bubble had to be created in the first place. That is why I found the opening difficult to look away from, not because it reinvents romantic comedy, it does not. You can recognize the ingredients: amnesia, forced proximity, opposites attracting, hidden identity, small town warmth, danger from the past. But the opening understands that familiar ingredients become interesting when they create pressure against one another. The sweetness is stronger because danger exists. The danger feels stranger because it sits beside comedy. The comedy works because Eun-sae refuses to behave like a passive victim of her circumstances. And the romance becomes more intriguing because Tae-ha cannot approach her without carrying knowledge she does not have. By the end of that first stretch, the question I entered with had already changed. I was no longer wondering whether Eun-sae would eventually believe Tae-ha was her boyfriend. That almost felt too small. I wanted to know something more difficult. If she eventually chooses him, will it be because of the history she lost, or because the person she is becoming chooses him all over again? And to understand why that possibility lands as effectively as it does, we need to stop looking at what happens for a moment and look at how the series makes us feel. Through framing, visual contrasts, editing, rhythm, texture, and the technical choices that separate the romantic world from the danger hiding underneath it. The visual trick of A Sticky Love is that the camera does not treat romance and danger as two separate shows, it makes them occupy the same frame. Netflix's official promotional material establishes three sharply different visual environments around Eun-sae: the polished professional world connected to her former life, the rural hospital and taffy village where she wakes without memory, and the darker criminal threat associated with the mystery surrounding her past. That separation gives the series an immediate visual grammar. City means control. The village means disorientation becoming comfort. The darker spaces mean the past refusing to stay buried. And what is interesting is that these worlds do not remain emotionally fixed. The village initially looks almost wrong for Eun-sae. Its quaint streets, traditional taffy shops, modest homes, and slower everyday texture clash with the identity she instinctively feels she should possess. Netflix itself describes the setting as alien and uncomfortable to her when she first arrives there, so warmth becomes a form of visual comedy. The environment says, relax. Woon-sae's body language says, absolutely not. That contradiction is much funnier than simply cutting to reaction shots after jokes. Production design is doing part of the joke before anyone speaks. Everything around Diary seems to suggest familiarity, domesticity, and ordinary life. Everything inside Eun-sae rejects that suggestion. That is why the taffy shops matter visually. Repeated objects become motifs when filmmakers place them inside enough different emotional situations. At first, the taffy imagery feels playful. It belongs to the title. It belongs to the village identity. It gives the show a warm material texture instead of the anonymous cafes and expensive apartments that could have housed a more conventional urban romance. But each repetition quietly reinforces the central idea of attachment. Director Kim Jang-han has explicitly connected the series' romantic concept to Korean taffy binding two people tightly together. The production design therefore takes an abstract theme and makes it visible. You do not need a character explaining that these two people are becoming difficult to separate. The world surrounding them keeps showing you stickiness. Then look at the framing of the central pair. The most important visual question in a forced proximity romance is distance. How much empty space sits between two people? Who enters whose space? Who turns away? Who remains in the frame after the other person leaves? And when do two separate compositions begin turning into shared compositions? Our Sticky Love gains a lot from treating Tae-ha and Eun-sae as people who are technically close long before they are emotionally synchronized. That means physical proximity can produce tension rather than immediate intimacy. They can occupy the same domestic environment and still feel like they belong to different worlds. That is useful. Because once the emotional relationship begins softening, the filmmaking does not need some enormous visual announcement. A smaller distance is enough. A longer look is enough. A frame that feels less divided is enough. This is where romantic cinematography works best. Not when the camera screams, "This is romantic," when the composition quietly stops resisting the possibility. Netflix's own description of the main trailer emphasizes exactly that progression. Eun-sae begins distrustful and uncomfortable. Then Taeha's steady warmth starts breaking through her defenses. The editing rhythm supports the same progression. Early on, the series benefits from collision. A serious image can be followed by something absurd. A suspicious beat can be interrupted by domestic comedy. An apparently soft interaction can suddenly reopen the mystery. Netflix openly marketed the series as a collision between fish out of water comedy and noir suspense, so these tonal cuts are part of the design rather than accidental instability. And editing is where that combination either lives or dies. If the darker material lingers too long, the romantic energy drains away. If the comedy keeps running after tension should have landed, the danger becomes harmless. The show frequently needs to leave a scene at exactly the moment the emotional meaning changes. A laugh lands, cut. A glance makes the situation less funny, cut. Something from the past intrudes. Suddenly, the warm scene we were just enjoying carries another meaning. That is tonal editing. The cut becomes the hinge between genres. There is another smart visual contrast in Tae himself. Boxing naturally creates a different screen language from domestic romance. Training spaces invite harder geometry. Bodies occupy defined zones. Movement is direct. Physical rhythm becomes repetitive. Distance has tactical meaning. Home life does the opposite. It asks people to share space without clear rules. That makes Tae-ha visually interesting because a character associated with controlled physical movement is placed inside situations where emotional movement is much harder to control. The series does not need to overstate that contrast. It is already built into what his occupation gives the camera. A boxing environment can isolate him. Domestic space can trap him beside Eun-sae. One asks him to manage an opponent. The other asks him to understand another person. And those are not the same skill. Lighting helps maintain the series' central contradiction as well. The romance is sold through warmth rather than glossy fantasy. Netflix repeatedly describes the series as heartwarming, feel-good, nostalgic, and rooted in the cozy atmosphere of its rural setting. That matters because the village should not look like danger. It needs to look like somewhere Eun-sae might eventually want to stay. Soft domestic interiors, daylight, food, storefronts, and lived-in spaces all push her toward belonging. But once the criminal mystery intrudes, the emotional temperature can change without the show needing to reinvent its entire visual identity. The threatening material works best when contrast increases. Faces become less readable, backgrounds become less comforting. Space suddenly feels less communal. The same story that spent time making you feel protected by ordinary surroundings can make uncertainty feel sharper simply by withholding that warmth. And notice how important visual clarity is to Eun-sae specifically. She is a character missing internal images. Her past is unavailable, so the world in front of her receives extra importance. She has to read surfaces, faces, rooms, objects, reactions. Her predicament naturally turns observation into storytelling. That makes close-ups particularly valuable, not simply because this is a romance, but because faces become evidence. Eun-sae studies Tae-ha. We study Eun-sae studying Tae-ha. Tae-ha watches to see whether she believes him, and we watch Tae to determine whether his reaction confirms or contradicts what he has just presented. A well-placed reaction shot can therefore perform three jobs at once: comedy, romance, suspicion. That economy is exactly what a genre hybrid like this needs. Sound operates similarly. A cozy romantic world can establish normality through ordinary village atmosphere, conversational rhythm, domestic movement, and the lighter musical language expected from the show's feel good identity. Then suspense becomes stronger when that comfortable soundscape changes. The key is not necessarily louder sound. Sometimes the opposite works better. Reduce the social noise, delay the reassuring musical cue, let an uncomfortable silence continue slightly longer. Suddenly, a harmless looking location can feel exposed. That is how genre can change without location changing, and that is ultimately what I appreciate most about the technical approach here. Ars Up does not require spectacular cinematography to serve its story. It requires controlled contradiction. Warm spaces containing uneasy information, close physical distance containing emotional distance, comedy timing interrupted by dangerous implications, domestic softness surrounding a man whose connection to violence has not completely disappeared, a woman surrounded by visual clues who cannot access the one archive that would explain them. The craft serves the mechanism. And because the taffy motif keeps quietly connecting setting, title, texture, and theme, the series develops an identity stronger than simply romantic comedy with amnesia. The camera keeps bringing Eun-sae and Tae-ha closer. The mystery keeps giving them reasons to pull apart, and somewhere between those opposing forces, the image begins to stretch. Just like the taffy. Now we can finally follow that stretch to the story itself. Not every scene, not every conversation, but a chain of choices that turns one suspicious arrangement into something neither Eun-sae nor Tae-ha can easily escape. The story really begins with a lie that is trying to do the work of a rescue. Before she becomes the confused woman answering to Go Eun-sae in Taffy village, she is a sole prosecutor investigating corruption connected to businessman and crime boss Baek Sang-gil. After she is attacked, Tae-ha, who has ties to Sang-gil's organization, is placed in the position where he is expected to ensure she cannot become a threat again. Instead, recognizing what has happened to her, he chooses to save her and eventually constructs the identity of Go Eun-sae around her. That decision is the cause from which almost everything else grows. Tae-ha wants to keep her alive. His obstacle is that keeping her alive requires hiding not only from Sang-gil, but from the truth of her own life. So he does something morally complicated. He gives her a safer story. He presents himself as her boyfriend. He tells her that she belongs in this little village world with him. He effectively displaces an identity that could get her killed with one design to make her disappear. And immediately, the rescue contains its own future disaster. Because Tae-ha can protect Eun-sae from Sang-gil by hiding information, but he cannot build a real relationship with her forever while doing the same thing. That is the first important causal link. Protection creates deception. Deception creates proximity. Proximity creates feeling. Feeling makes the deception more dangerous. When Eun-sae leaves the hospital and enters Tae-ha's supposed version of their shared life, the details do not fit the woman she instinctively feels herself to be. Netflix's own episode 2 summary emphasizes that the villagers, the environment, and Tae-ha's suspicious little inconsistencies all strike her as wrong, pushing her to test whether he can actually be trusted. This is where her central want becomes clear. She wants control over her own identity, not romance, not even memory in the abstract. Control. She wants the right to know which parts of the life surrounding her are real. And the irony is that Tae-ha wants something very similar. He wants control over what reaches her. He needs to keep Sang-gil from discovering she survived. He needs to prevent her old life from pulling her into immediate danger. He needs his cover story to hold together. So, the romance begins with two characters trying to control the same missing information from opposite directions. Eun-sae wants it opened. Tae-ha wants it contained. That is why their bickering has more weight than standard romantic friction. Every silly disagreement contains a serious conflict underneath it. She interprets his evasiveness as evidence that he is lying. She is correct. But the conclusion she cannot yet reach is why. And Tae-ha's problem gets worse because Eun-sae remains intellectually herself even without autobiographical memory. The person who used to investigate suspicious stories is now living inside one. Of course, she notices the holes. The constructed boyfriend story might work on somebody desperate to accept an answer. Yoon-se is almost constitutionally incapable of leaving contradictions alone. So Tae-ha keeps having to maintain a lie in front of exactly the wrong person. Then the story makes a crucial choice. Instead of making their relationship progress through explanations, it lets Tae-ha try to create experiences. By episode 3, Netflix describes him taking Eun-sae out for a day intended to lift her spirits. At the same time, information about what happened to her begins moving back toward Sang-gil. That parallel is the series in miniature. Tae-ha tries to create a happy present. The past moves closer. He gives Eun-sae something emotionally real while standing on something factually false. And that is where the story becomes sticky in the most interesting sense. Because Eun-sae does not need to remember loving Tae-ha in order to enjoy being with him now. That possibility fundamentally changes the conflict. At first, exposing Tae-ha's lie would simply mean exposing a liar. But once real affection begins forming, exposing the lie threatens something Eun-sae herself has participated in creating. That is much harder. The film or series could have taken the easier route and made memory the sole source of romance. She remembers, therefore she loves. Instead, the more compelling question becomes whether present-day Eun-sae can build an emotional truth that exists independently of whatever the past eventually reveals. Then she pushes beyond Tae-ha's version of reality. Episode 4 sends Eun-sae toward Seoul in search of answers, where Netflix says she encounters an ugly truth about who she used to be while also learning about Tae-ha's painful history. This is the first major escalation. The village has functioned like a sealed compartment. Inside it, Tae-ha controls most of the narrative. He knows the people. He knows the environment. He understands what Eun-sae has been told. So breaks that control. The moment Eun-sae reaches outside the story Tae-ha constructed, she begins encountering evidence he cannot edit. And that matters emotionally because identity is rarely flattering in its entirety. When people fantasize about recovering lost memories, they imagine retrieving themselves. But what if the self you recover is not the person you hope to discover? What if your previous life contains choices, relationships, hardness, ambition, or pain that the present version of you does not immediately recognize? Now amnesia stops being just loss. It becomes distance. Eun-sae can look at the person she once was almost as if evaluating a stranger. And that creates one of the story's better thematic possibilities. Maybe identity is not simply what you remember. Maybe identity is also what you choose once you know. At the same time, Tae-ha's past becomes harder to separate from the man Eun-sae is beginning to know. He is not merely the rustic boxing coach in sweatpants who appeared at her hospital bed. His history is connected to the darker machinery surrounding her situation. Secondary coverage of the premiere establishes him as a former boxer pulled into Sang-gil's criminal world before the cover life in the village. That revelation complicates every protective gesture. Tae-ha is not an innocent outsider who stumbled into Yoon-se's danger. He comes from inside the system threatening her, which means his redemption cannot simply consist of saying he cares about her. He has to choose against the word that once defined him. That is the real obstacle. The romance asks whether somebody can become more than the worst system they participated in. And Yoon-se's amnesia creates the strange circumstance that allows her to meet Tae-ha without the entire weight of his reputation arriving first. She experiences the man before she can fully judge the history. That does not erase accountability, it makes judgment more complicated. By episode 5, Netflix's synopsis says the relationship has grown noticeably sweeter, only for encounters involving people from Tae-ha's past to test their new intimacy. There is the next link. The past does not merely threaten them physically. It interrupts the version of Tae-ha that Eun-sae has begun trusting. Each new piece asks whether the caring man beside her and the man connected to earlier violence can exist inside the same person. And Tae-ha is facing the reverse question. Is Eun-sae the vulnerable woman he has been protecting in the village, or the relentless prosecutor whose real life will eventually demand that she return to everything he has tried to keep away from her? The answer, of course, is both. That is what makes the relationship difficult. They initially fall toward simplified versions of each other. Reality keeps adding missing pieces. The middle stretch then uses comedy to show how thoroughly their private arrangement has become part of the village's public life. Episode 6 revolves around misunderstandings spreading into rumors, villagers attempting to intervene, and Eun-sae eventually cornering Tae-ha. On the surface, that is classic romantic comedy escalation. People misunderstand, people gossip, people make things worse while trying to help. But underneath, it exposes another weakness in Taya's plan. A fake identity becomes harder to control the more relationships it creates. The villagers are no longer scenery, they know Eun-sae. They react to her. She affects them. They affect her. The false life is becoming socially real. That is fascinating. Tae created Eun-sae as camouflage. But a person cannot remain camouflage once she begins building relationships. The invented identity accumulates authentic experiences. Now, destroying the lie may also destroy something genuine. Episode 7 raises the pressure further when Eun-sae disappears, and the village mobilizes to look for her, while her doctor, An Ji-jun, arrives at Tae-ha's home asking questions connected to her past. Notice what has changed. Early in the story, Eun-sae believes she does not belong in this place. Now her absence disrupts the place. That is belonging demonstrated through consequence. The village cares because she has become part of its emotional structure, and Tae-ha's carefully separated worlds begin colliding. Hospital, past identity, village, criminal threat, romance. He can no longer keep each compartment closed. Then Sang-gil finally understands the betrayal. Netflix's episode 8 synopsis makes the turning point explicit. Sang-gil realizes what Tae-ha has done. Eun-sae's safety is threatened, and Tae-ha begins preparing to help her escape. This is where Tae-ha's original choice returns with full force. Remember the beginning. He saved her. Everything after that was an attempt to delay the consequence of saving her. Now the consequence arrives, and Tae-ha's solution is revealing. He plans to send her away. That is love moving from possession towards sacrifice. At first, his protection required keeping Eun-sae close because closeness allowed him to control the situation. Now protecting her may require accepting distance. That is emotional development produced directly by the blood. But then the mechanism changes completely. By episode 9, Netflix confirms that Eun-sae's memories have returned. She turns her attention toward bringing Sang-gil down, even as her existence puts Tae-ha and the entire village at risk. And this is the point where the original romantic setup dies. The amnesiac Eun-sae no longer needs Tae-ha to tell her who she is. The information imbalance collapses, the prosecutor returns, now she can act, now she can investigate, now she can choose what to do with everything Tae concealed. And this is exactly where the story proves whether the relationship has become real. Because if the romance only worked while Eun-sae was vulnerable, then it should fall apart the moment she regains agency. Instead, the more meaningful test begins after agency returns. Her central want shifts. Earlier she wanted to discover herself. Now she knows enough to pursue Sang-gil. The obstacle shifts too. Truth is no longer hidden from her. Truth now demands action. And action carries consequences for everyone she has come to care about. That is a much better final escalation than simply asking whether her memories will restore the old status quo. There is no old status quo anymore. Taffy village changed her. Tae-ha changed her. And she changed Tae-ha. So even recovered memory cannot cleanly separate past Eun-sae from the woman created through these new experiences. Then episode 10 introduces one final, quieter consequence. Netflix says Eun-sae becomes consumed with the work of putting Sang-gil away, while Tae-ha begins wondering whether there is still room for him in her restored life. That is exactly the romantic problem the story needed to reach. Not does she remember him, Not was the fake boyfriend story convincing? Not even can he keep her safe? The question is now, when Eun-sae has her identity, her purpose, and her independence back, does she still choose Tae-ha? Because anything before that choice can be blamed on circumstance. Amnesia forced them together. Danger kept them together. The village contained them together. But once Eun-sae knows who she is again, love can no longer hide behind the setup, and Tae-ha faces the consequence of getting exactly what he should have wanted for her. She no longer needs him in the same way. That hurts. But it also creates the first opportunity for an equal relationship. The lie brought them together. The danger made separation difficult. The missing memories turned intimacy into an experiment. But none of those things can answer the final emotional question. Only choice can do that. And that takes us back to the taffy. At the beginning, stickiness meant being trapped in a situation neither character fully controlled. Now it means something else. Two identities have touched. Two histories have touched. The prosecutor and the former criminal, the city and the village, the fabricated relationship and the authentic feelings created inside it. You can expose the lie, you can restore the memory, you can bring the hidden past into the light. But you cannot return either person to exactly who they were before they met. Something remains attached. And this is the moment the box opens completely. The strongest thing Azdiki love does is make the lie between Eun-sae and Tae-ha feel more emotionally complicated every time the relationship becomes sweeter. That sounds simple. It is not. Because the entire romance is built on dangerous structural ground. Tae-ha knows who Eun-sae really is. Eun-sae does not. He creates the identity she lives under. He claims a romantic history that she cannot verify. And yet the series still needs us to want these two people together without pretending that the deception does not matter. That balancing act is the real achievement. And the performances are what keep it alive. Ha-young has the more explosive role. Early coverage of the premiere specifically singled out her comic timing, and you can immediately understand why. Eun-sae is funniest when she is not trying to be funny. I instinct simply reject the life Taya presents to her. She studies his clothes, his surroundings, his explanations, and almost everything about this supposedly familiar existence seems beneath the person she imagines herself to be. But Ha-young does something important underneath those reactions. She never turns Eun-sae into a cartoon. There is confidence even when she is completely lost. That contradiction makes the character work. Imagine having no memory of your education, your career, your money, your relationships, or even your name, yet somehow retaining the absolute conviction that the man standing in front of you cannot possibly be the boyfriend you would have chosen. That could become broad comedy. Instead, Ha-young makes it feel like personality surviving memory. Her face is constantly evaluating. There's usually another thought arriving immediately after the first one. Suspicion, embarrassment, curiosity, annoyance. Then occasionally an emotion she would rather not acknowledge. That last part matters most. Because the romance only becomes convincing when Yoon-se's resistance stops looking like pure rejection and starts containing flashes of attraction. And Ha-young is good at allowing those changes to happen before Yoon-se herself seems ready to admit them. Jung Hae-in has almost the opposite assignment. Tae-ha cannot explode emotionally all the time because the character is carrying too much information. His performance depends on containment. Official character material describes Tae-ha as a former promising boxer who became involved with a gang, later tries to leave that life behind, and encounters Eun-sae again during what is supposed to be his final assignment. That history gives Jung Hae-in something valuable to play against. Tae's want cannot erase the fact that he knows how dangerous the world around them can become. So even during lighter scenes, there is often a protective calculation underneath him. How much can he tell her? How much can he hide? Is she noticing too much? Can he keep her calm? Can he keep himself calm? That restraint makes Tae-ha more effective than he would be as a constantly swaggering gangster or an endlessly perfect romantic hero. He is neither. He is a man trying to behave normally inside a situation he knows is completely abnormal. And then the chemistry between Jung Hae-in and Ha-young becomes the bridge. Before release, both actors spoke about actively discussing how to make Tae-ha and Eun-sae feel more lovable and romantic even while delivering combative material. And Ha-young described Jung Hae-in as collaborative about those choices. You can see why that work matters. Their chemistry is not based on immediate harmony. It is based on rhythm. Eun-sae pushes. Tae-ha absorbs. Eun-sae questions. Tae-ha improvises. She moves toward him unexpectedly. He loses some of the composure he has been using to manage the situation. Then the balance resets. That really means their relationship can evolve without either character suddenly becoming someone else. And one early moment captures that brilliantly. At the end of the premiere, Eun-sae essentially decides that if Tae-ha truly is her boyfriend, physical chemistry should provide some evidence, so she unexpectedly kisses him as a test. The first episode review and pre-release stills both highlight that moment. For me, that is the scene where the entire romantic mechanism clicks, not because the kiss itself is extraordinary, because of why it happens. Eun-sae turns romance into investigation. That is perfect for her. She does not passively wait for butterflies. She creates an experiment. If Taya is telling the truth, maybe her body will recognize something her memory cannot. And suddenly a standard romantic comedy device becomes completely character specific. The case is funny because of her logic. It is tense because Thaya knows the relationship story is false. It is romantic because attraction may still be real. And it is thematically important because the scene asks whether emotional recognition can exist independently of memory. One action, four functions. That is efficient writing. The story construction works for the same reason. Its best ideas perform more than one job. The village is not merely a cute location. It isolates Eun-sae from her previous identity while giving her a new community. The amnesia is not merely a mystery device, it resets the emotional power between the leads. Taya's criminal history is not simply there to generate action. It makes his desire for a quieter life part of his romantic journey. The taffy is not simply a title joke. Director Kim Jang-han explicitly used its stickiness as a central metaphor for two people becoming increasingly bound together as difficulties intensify. That kind of thematic economy helps the series feel more coherent than its ingredients suggest it should. Because on paper, this is a lot: amnesia, prosecutors, gangsters, boxing, fake romance, first love, small town comedy, crime conspiracy, enemies to lovers energy. Any one of those elements could hijack the show. Instead, the better sections keep returning to the same central pressure. Can something real grow inside something fabricated? That gives the story a spine. The direction also understands that the romance needs visual relief from the darker material. Netflix deliberately sold the series as a combination of nostalgic small-town romantic comedy and noir suspense. The village atmosphere is what makes that contrast work. The taffy shops, modest interiors, boxing gum environment, community spaces, and everyday routines give Taya and Eun-sae somewhere to exist as people rather than merely as pieces in a crime plot. That is essential. You need to see them doing ordinary things, annoying each other, eating, walking, arguing over small details, sharing spaces neither of them fully knows how to navigate. Those moments create emotional texture. Then, when the criminal story intrudes, you understand what could be lost. Without the warmth, danger would just be plot. With the warmth, danger threatens a life that has begun to feel worth protecting, and the sound works best in exactly that supporting role. It does not need to announce every emotional shift. The lighter passages benefit when conversations, awkward silences, reactions, and everyday village atmosphere are allowed to carry comedy naturally. Then tension becomes more effective when that comfort thins out. A pause feels longer, a room feels emptier, the emotional temperature drops. The series understands that suspense is often created not by adding noise but by removing reassurance. But perhaps the most important thing our sticky laugh does brilliantly is give both leads is confirmation that mirrors the other. Yoon-se begins without her past. Her journey is toward reclaiming truth. without automatically surrendering the person she became while the truth was missing. Tae-ha begins trapped by his past. His journey is toward becoming somebody who deserves a future that his earlier choices did not guarantee. She has to recover history without being imprisoned by it. He has to confront history without being defined entirely by it. That symmetry gives the romance weight. They are not simply attracted because the leads look good together. They are each standing at the same philosophical crossroads from opposite directions. How much does the past get to decide who you are now? Eun-sae asks that because she cannot remember hers. Tae-ha asks it because he remembers his too well. And that connection is where the show becomes more than its gimmick. The most unforgettable scene may begin with a kiss used as evidence, but the larger achievement is what happens after that. Every new piece of evidence makes a relationship harder to categorize. Fake boyfriend, protector, liar, first love, partner, danger, home. By the time those labels begin overlapping, the title finally earns itself. Their lives have become sticky. Not because the story keeps them together artificially, because every attempt to separate truth from deception reveals that something genuine has grown between them anyway, and that is what our sticky love does best. It takes a premise that could have been nothing more than a cute romantic trick and keeps asking what that trick costs emotionally. But strong chemistry and clever structure do not solve everything. Some of the same mechanisms that make the series addictive also create its biggest weaknesses. And once you start pulling at those weaker threads, a few parts of the sticky romance stretch much further than they should. The same lie that makes our sticky love interesting is also the thing the series sometimes handles too comfortably. That is my biggest problem with it. Tae-ha does not merely hide one embarrassing detail from Eun-sae. The entire relationship she believes she has with him is constructed after she loses her memory. The official premise itself depends on Tae-ha claiming to be her boyfriend while Eun-sae has no reliable way to verify who she is or what their relationship was. As a romantic comedy mechanism, that is fantastic. As an emotional issue, it is much heavier, and occasionally the series wants the first version without fully sitting with the second. Because once Eun-sae starts enjoying Taeha's company, the warmth of their chemistry can make the original deception feel almost harmless. But it is not harmless. He controls information about her identity. He decides what version of her life she receives. He benefits emotionally from a situation in which she cannot give informed trust because she does not know the truth. Yes, his motivation is protection. Yes, the crime surrounding her gives him legitimate reasons to fear what will happen if the truth gets out. That makes his decision understandable. It does not automatically make it emotionally clean, and I wish the series allowed that discomfort to bleed longer. The stronger version of this romance is not one where Eun-sae simply learns why Tae-ha lied and therefore everything becomes acceptable. The stronger version forces Tae-ha to understand that good intentions do not erase the fact that another person's autonomy was taken away. Those are two different questions. Why did you lie? And what did the lie do to me? Whenever our sticky love focuses on both, the writing becomes richer. Whenever it treats motivation as complete absolution, some of that richness disappears. The second weakness comes from the tone mixture. Netflix deliberately presented the series as both a nostalgia feel-good romantic comedy and a story carrying noir suspense through the threads surrounding Eun-sae. That mixture gives the show its identity. It also creates some of its least convincing transitions. Sometimes you move from genuine danger into village comedy so quickly that the threat loses weight. At other moments, the criminal storyline interrupts a romantic rhythm just when the relationship needs another quiet beat. The problem is not that comedy and darkness cannot coexist. They absolutely can. The problem is calibration. If Sang-gil and the criminal machinery are dangerous enough to justify Tae-ha constructing an entirely false life for Eun-sae, then that threat needs to feel consistently serious. But if the show remains too long inside the darkness, the cozy romantic tone disappears. So the series occasionally feels as though it is negotiating with itself. How frightening can this become before it stops being comfort viewing? How silly can this become before the danger stops being believable. Most of the time, it finds the balance. Not always, and that leads to a pacing problem. The premise is strongest when new information changes the relationship. A clue exposes a contradiction. A contradiction changes Eun-sae's opinion of Tae-ha. That change forces Tae-ha into another decision. That decision produces another consequence. That is momentum. But the middle portion sometimes stretches misunderstandings and village complications after we already understand the emotional point. Comedy can deepen character. It can also delay movement. There are moments when you can feel the series protecting its central secret because revealing too much too quickly would shorten the romantic mechanism. And once you notice that, the amnesia starts behaving less like Yoon-se's condition and more like a screenwriting timer. That is the danger with almost every memory loss story. Information can become suspiciously convenient. A character remembers exactly enough for the next episode but not enough to resolve the central conflict. Someone arrives just before a conversation can finish. Another clue becomes available precisely when the story needs escalation. None of those devices destroys our sticky love. But together they occasionally make the machinery visible, and when the machinery becomes visible, the emotional illusion weakens. There is also an imbalance between the central couple and some of the surrounding characters. The village works wonderfully as a collective presence because it gives Eun-sae a sense of community she initially does not believe belongs to her. But individual supporting characters do not always receive enough interior life to become as memorable as the environment itself. Sometimes they function primarily as romantic accelerators. They misunderstand something, they spread information, they interfere, they create embarrassment, they help when danger arrives. Those functions are useful, but a stronger ensemble would make the eventual stakes feel even more personal. The same issue appears on the darker side. Baek Sang-gil is important because he turns Taeha's deception from romantic dishonesty into a survival decision. The official Netflix setup explicitly positions criminal danger as the pressure beneath romance. But the crime story is most interesting when it reveals something about Tae-ha, what he once accepted, what he now regrets, what he fears becoming again. When it shifts toward more conventional villain mechanics, it becomes less distinctive. We have seen dangerous men pursuing witnesses before. We have seen former criminals trying to escape organizations before. What belongs uniquely to our sticky love is the emotional collision between that history and this bizarre invented relationship. Whenever the crime plot moves away from that collision, the show becomes more ordinary. And finally, the sweetness can occasionally become too protective. The title promises stickiness. Director Kim Jang-han described the romance itself through that image of two people binding together like Korean taffy. But sticky love should sometimes be uncomfortable. Attachment creates obligation. Love makes living harder. Knowing somebody's worst history complicates forgiveness. Regaining memory can destroy the safe version of reality you had begun enjoying. Those ideas deserve sharp edges. The series sometimes sands those edges down because it wants you to keep feeling good. I understand why. That warmth is part of its appeal, but I would have sacrificed a little comfort for another layer of consequence. None of these problems ruins the series for me. The central chemistry survives. The identity mechanism remains clever. The taffy metaphor remains specific enough to give the show personality. And the relationship still contains a genuinely interesting question about whether a person can choose a new future after discovering an inconvenient past. But our sticky love is strongest when it trusts that question. It is weaker whenever it reaches for another misunderstanding, another convenient delay, or another tonal escape route instead of allowing Yoon-sae and Tae-ha to confront exactly how complicated the connection really is. That is the difference between a romance that is merely sticky and one that leaves a mark. And to understand where this series sits among other stories built around memory, secrets, danger, and unlikely intimacy, we need to put it beside a few neighboring boxes. Put our sticky love beside other Korean romances built around secrecy, danger, and emotional reinvention, and its strengths become easier to see. The first useful comparison is Hometown Cha Cha Cha, not because the plots are especially similar. They are not. What connects them is the function of the village. In Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha, a city professional arrives in a small coastal community and initially sees the place almost as an inconvenience. Slowly, the community stops being background and becomes part of the character's emotional transformation. Our Sticky Love uses Taffy Village in a similar emotional way. Eun-sae begins disconnected from it. She does not recognize the place as home. She does not understand why someone like her would belong there. But the longer she remains, the village creates a version of belonging that memory never gave her. The difference is important. Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha lets its heroine consciously choose a new environment. Eun-sae is effectively dropped into one through circumstances she does not understand. That makes the warmth in our Sticky Love more suspicious at first. You cannot fully relax into the village because you know its comforting identity was partially constructed around a lie. But that also makes its eventual emotional power stronger. If Hometown Chow 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 asks whether a different place can reveal another version of you, a Sticky Love asks something stranger. What if you meet that different version of yourself before you remember the old one? Then there is Healer. This is where the secret identity element becomes more useful. Healer also builds romance around hidden information, dangerous histories, and one person knowing more than the other. The attraction works partly because the romantic connection forms before every piece of identity has been placed honestly on the table. But Healer approaches secrecy like a puzzle. Identity is compartmentalized. Different personas occupy different emotional spaces. The suspense comes from wondering when those identities will collide. Our Sticky Love turns the mechanism inward. Eun-sae is not simply missing information about Taeha, she is missing information about herself. That makes the imbalance more intimate. In Healer, the question is often whether someone can love the same man after discovering who he really is. Here, Eun-sae also has to ask whether she can still live as the same woman after discovering who she really was. That dual identity problem gives our Sticky Love its own flavor. The third box I would place beside it is Suspicious Partner. Again, not because the plots match exactly, but because legal identity, romance, crime, and mistrust all have to occupy the same dramatic space. Suspicious Partner understands that romantic chemistry becomes more addictive when the characters also have reasons to investigate, doubt, or protect one another. That is territory our Sticky Love knows well. Both stories gain energy from letting affection and suspicion coexist. But Suspicious Partner allows its legal world to remain more consistently active in the narrative. That is one area where our Sticky Love sometimes falls short by comparison. Eun-sae, being a prosecutor, is thematically perfect. Her profession reflects the story's obsession with evidence and truth. But because amnesia temporarily removes her from that professional environment, the legal identity sometimes functions more powerfully as symbolism than as an active procedural engine. When she begins reclaiming that part of herself, the series becomes sharper because the prosecutor and the woman who learned to trust Tae-ha finally start existing at the same time. And then we have When the Camellia Blooms. This may be the closest tonal comparison. A small community, a romance with warmth and awkwardness, a thread running underneath everyday life. Comedy beside genuine danger, that show is particularly effective at making the community feel alive enough that the darker material threatens something tangible. You do not just worry about the central couple, you worry about the entire social world around them. That is where our Sticky Love does not always reach the same level. Taffy Village is charming. Its collective presence matters. But some of the supporting figures remain more functional than deeply dimensional. By comparison, When the Camellia Blooms gives its community enough individual personality that the town feels almost like another protagonist. If our Sticky Love had pushed further in that direction, the later danger around the village would carry even more emotional weight. But here is where our Sticky Love separates itself from all four comparisons. The amnesia is not really its most original feature. The manufactured relationship is. A man claims to be the boyfriend of a woman who cannot remember enough to challenge the history. Then, inside that false relationship, authentic intimacy starts developing. That is a particularly uncomfortable romantic paradox. Most secret identity romances hide one truth. This one creates an entire emotional reality and then asks whether reality becomes legitimate simply because genuine feelings eventually appear inside it. That is messier and therefore more interesting. If you loved Our Sticky Love specifically for the small town healing and community warmth, Hometown Cha Cha is the obvious next watch. If the secrecy, double meanings, and dangers surrounding romance were what kept you hooked, go to Ward Healer. If you like the combination of legal characters, crime, comedy, and romantic suspicion, Suspicious Partner is probably your strongest match. And if what you really enjoyed was a strange tonal balance of cozy community life with a darker threat pressing in from outside, When the Camellia Blooms does that combination with even greater confidence. But what should you watch instead if Our Sticky Love did not work for you? That depends on what pushed you away. If the amnesia mechanism felt too artificial, try Hometown Chow Chow Chow, where emotional transformation grows from conscious choices rather than missing memory. If the crime story felt too light, Healer gives its action and conspiracy machinery more weight. If the village material felt underdeveloped, When the Camellia Blooms builds a richer communal ecosystem. And if what you wanted was a sharper legal romance balance, Suspicious Partner spends far more time letting professional identity shape the central relationship directly. That is the useful thing about comparison. It reveals that Our Sticky Love does not win by doing one familiar ingredient better than everybody else. It wins when its ingredients collide. Memory loss against professional instinct, village comfort against criminal danger, a fake relationship against authentic feeling, a man trying to escape his past beside a woman trying to recover hers. Other romances may handle individual pieces with more precision, but very few arrange those pieces into exactly this shape. And that brings us to the world outside the story, because Our Sticky Love did not arrive in a vacuum. It arrived at the moment when Korean romance, global streaming culture, comfort viewing, and genre blending had already trained audiences to expect certain things. The next compartment is not about Eun-sae and Tae-ha. It is about us. Our Sticky Love arrived on August 7, 2026, at a moment when a Korean romantic comedy on Netflix no longer needs to explain itself to the rest of the world. That matters. A decade ago, an internationally released Korean romance could still be treated in some markets as specialist programming, something you discovered because you already followed Korean television. That landscape has changed dramatically. Netflix said earlier this year that Korean content remains its most watched non-English content category, while Netflix's own Tudum reporting says more than 80% of its global membership has watched Korean titles. So when Our Sticky Love places a Korean prosecutor beside a former boxer in a countryside village centered on traditional yacht, it does not need to flatten those details into something culturally anonymous. It can be extremely Korean and immediately global at the same time. That is one of the most interesting parts of the cultural moment surrounding the series. The taffy does not have to become generic candy. The village does not need to become some imaginary universal romantic town. The rhythms of Korean family relationships, professional hierarchy, village gossip, food, social obligation, and the prosecutor's status can remain specific. The streaming platform handles the travel. That is a fundamentally different environment from one in which international success required a story to disguise where it came from. And Our Sticky Love benefits from that confidence, because its strongest identifying image is not something imported from a generic romantic comedy template. It is yacht, sticky Korean taffy. Netflix's campaign leaned heavily into that metaphor, with director Kim Jang-han describing the romance as one that binds the couple together as tightly as Korean taffy. That is cultural specificity functioning as storytelling rather than decoration. And it arrives during another very recognizable streaming trend. Genre purity is becoming less important. Netflix's 2026 Korean slate openly emphasized stories crossing between romance, comedy, thrillers, emotional drama, and genre-defying concepts. The platform described genre blending as one of the defining characteristics of its Korean slate this year. That makes Our Sticky Love feel almost perfectly designed for its moment. Romantic comedy, crime, memory mystery, small town healing drama, former gangster redemption story, A little action, a little noir, a lot of bickering. 10 years ago, somebody might have looked at those ingredients and asked which genre the series actually belongs to. In 2026, the mixture itself is part of the selling point. And Netflix knew exactly how to market it. Its launch material described the show as both an ultimate comfort watch and a romance mixed with noir suspense. Think about that combination, comfort and threat. Those ideas should almost cancel each other out. Instead, contemporary streaming drama increasingly expects you to want both. You want something warm enough to spend hours inside, but you also want enough narrative propulsion to keep the next episode button irresistible. That is the cultural space our sticky love occupies. The village provides comfort. The mystery provides momentum. Tae-ha provides romantic fantasy. His history destabilizes the fantasy. Eun-sae gives us competence. Her amnesia temporarily removes the certainty that competence normally provides. Almost every appealing quality has an opposing force attached to it. That is extremely binge-friendly construction. There is another reason the show feeds so specifically of this era. The male romantic fantasy has changed. Tae-ha is not built around wealth, corporate power, or perfect social status. He is introduced as rougher, a boxing coach, a man with a compromised history, someone physically capable but emotionally trapped by decisions he once made. That fits a broader appetite for romantic leads whose desirability is connected less to perfection and more to emotional repair. The fantasy is not simply this powerful man chooses you. It becomes what if somebody who believes he has ruined his own future chooses to become better because another person makes a future imaginable again. That is a different romantic promise. And Eun-sae is equally contemporary in the way she resists becoming merely the woman being rescued. Even with her memory, her professional instincts, and difficult personality remain central to the comedy. She questions, she tests, she resists. She does not become blank just because her biography has vanished. That makes the romance easier to accept for a modern audience that is far less willing to treat female helplessness as inherently romantic. Now, what about reception? This is where we need to be precise. As of August 12, Our Sticky Love has been publicly available for only 5 days. That is nowhere near enough time to pretend it has a certain critical reputation. One of the early English language reviews from The Seater recommended streaming it and responded positively to the unusual blend of romance, comedy, crime, Ha-young's comic energy, and the story's escalating complications. That gives us an early critical signal. It does not give us consensus. And the same caution applies to audience reception. There is already online conversation and obvious pre-release interest around Jung Hae-in, Ha-young, and the premise. But a responsible analysis should not turn several days of reactions into some grand declaration that audiences universally love or reject the show. The data has not matured enough. Netflix's publicly indexed top 10 material retrieved at this point does not yet give us a reliable, completed first-week global ranking for Our Sticky Love. So claiming a specific worldwide performance number would be premature. Netflix's top 10 system itself reports rankings by completed weekly periods, which means the release is simply too fresh for us to draw a meaningful long-term streaming curve from it. And that means there is currently no meaningful second wave discovery story either. There cannot be. The first wave is still happening. The series has not had time to disappear, be discovered, become a sleeper hit, develop nostalgia, or undergo some major reassessment. We are watching the first chapter of its public life in real time. The awards question is similar. There is no verified major awards history to discuss yet. The show premiered 5 days ago. Any attempt to talk confidently about what it won, what award bodies ignored, or which performance was robbed would be pretending the future has already happened. So for now, the most useful awards judgment is not prediction. It is observation. If the series eventually enters awards conversations, the performances would make more sense as the focus than the broad genre machinery. Yang has the technically difficult task of keeping Eun-sae's personality coherent while her identity is fractured. Jung Hae-in has to make Tae-ha emotionally appealing without erasing the moral discomfort surrounding what he hides. Those are performance challenges worth watching. But deserving consideration and receiving recognition are not the same thing. Time has to answer the second part. So, does our sticky love feel timeless or perfectly of its era? Right now, I would say both, but in very different places. Its distribution is absolutely of 2026. A Korean romantic comedy launches globally on the same platform, enters conversations across countries almost immediately, and assumes an international audience already understands the language of K-drama. Netflix says APAC titles now account for more than half of its weekly global top 10 non-English lists, while viewing hours for APAC content on the service have quadrupled since 2019. That global ecosystem is part of the show's moment. The genre blending is of its era. The binge structure is of its era. The expectation that romance should share space with crime, identity questions, healing, and mystery is very much of its era. But the thing underneath all of that is older. Memory disappears. A person's past becomes uncertain. Another person stands in front of them asking to be trusted. And suddenly we are back to one of the oldest questions love stories can ask. Do you love someone because of everything you remember experiencing with them? Or can there be something recognizable between two people even after the evidence disappears? That question does not belong to 2026, it belongs anywhere. And perhaps that is why the series has the possibility of surviving beyond the trend that produced it. The streaming package may age. The genre mixture may eventually feel associated with a particular phase of Korean television, but the emotional mechanism beneath it is much harder to date. Because people have always wanted to know whether love is memory, choice, instinct, habit, or some impossible mixture of all four. And once a story asks that question through amnesia, another thing happens almost immediately. People start inventing answers, they begin questioning which details are accidental, which lies hide deeper truths, whether certain behavior reveals something about the characters before they consciously know it, whether the title itself is foreshadowing more than the story initially admits. And that means the next compartment belongs not to critics or Netflix or awards bodies. It belongs to the theories you build while watching. This is where our sticky love creates an unusual problem for a theory section. The series only premiered globally on August 7, 2026, so there is not yet a mature, well-documented body of fan theories that we can responsibly treat as established audience interpretations. Searches for substantial theory discussions around the series are still thin, which makes sense this early in its release life. Netflix itself only launched the show 5 days ago. So instead of inventing Reddit debates that do not exist, let us do something more useful. Let us separate what the series actually supports from the interpretations it naturally invites. And the strongest reading begins with one simple question. Did Tae-ha create Go Eun-sae purely to protect Ji-won? Or did he also create a version of their relationship he secretly wished had existed? That distinction matters. Official character information identifies Eun-sae as Tae-ha's long-lost first love and establishes that he encounters her again while carrying out a final assignment connected to the gang before, choosing to protect her. So his boyfriend Lai is not emotionally neutral. He is not inventing romance with a complete stranger. He is taking an old feeling and giving it a fictional present. That does not mean Tae-ha consciously plans to manipulate her into loving him. The series gives us much stronger evidence that survival is his immediate motivation. But emotionally, the situation raises a darker possibility. When Tae-ha tells an amnesiac woman that they are together, he is not only protecting her identity. He is briefly living inside a version of reality where the woman he once loved finally belongs beside him. That makes the lie more complicated than simple camouflage. And the film itself supports that complication because Netflix's promotional description emphasizes both the hidden truth beneath their relationship and Taya's steady affection gradually breaking down Yoonse's defenses. So theory 1 is not that Tae-ha engineered the entire situation for romance. The evidence does not support that. The stronger interpretation is that one circumstances give him the impossible life he never had. Separating protection from desire becomes increasingly difficult. And that is exactly why the lie eventually has to collapse. Because love cannot remain morally meaningful if Tae-ha is the only person allowed to choose it. Now consider the second interpretation. Go Eun-sae may not simply be a temporary identity waiting for Go Ji-won to return. She may represent a genuinely new version of the same woman. That idea is much stronger than the familiar amnesia cliché where memory comes back and the real person simply replaces the confused version. Look at what survives when Ji-won's autobiographical memory disappears. Her intelligence survives, her taste survives, her instinct to question suspicious explanations survives. Her confidence survives. Even early reviews noticed that despite the missing memories, her prosecutor-like analytical nature keeps attacking the holes in Taya's cover story. So the series quietly separates identity into two categories: what you remember and how you respond. Ji-won loses one, she retains much of the other. Then something new happens. Eun-sae accumulates experiences Ji-won never had. Life in Taffy village. Relationships with the villagers. A new understanding of Tae-ha. Moments of intimacy created without access to their shared past. That means recovered memory cannot truly erase Eun-sae. Even if every old fact returns, the new experiences remain. This supports a powerful reading. The romance is not about Tae-ha getting his first love back. It is about both characters accepting that the person he once loved and the woman standing beside him now cannot be perfectly separated. The memory returns. The new self remains attached. Sticky again. Then there is the title itself. The obvious reading is romantic. Director Kim Jang-han has explicitly described the love story through the image of Korean taffy binding two people together. But what if the title carries a warning as well as a promise? Because stickiness is not the same thing as healthy closeness. Something sticky can be difficult to escape. It can transfer from one surface to another. It can leave residue after separation. And practically every major relationship in the story operates through exactly that mechanism. Taya leaves the criminal world, but the criminal world remains attached to him. Ji-won loses her memories, but her old instincts remain attached to her. Tae-ha invents a false relationship. Real emotions attach themselves to it. Eun-sae attempts to understand her past. Her new village life becomes impossible to cleanly remove, so perhaps sticky love does not mean that perfect soulmates are magically destined to remain together. The stronger interpretation is that intimacy permanently changes the people involved. Even if they separate, neither returns untouched. That reading fits the series much better than simple destiny. And then we reach the biggest question. Does Eun-sae fall in love with Tae-ha because some unconscious part of her remembers him? The series deliberately tempts us toward that interpretation. Their shared history makes it possible. Her attraction sometimes appears before she can logically justify it. And the premise itself invites a romantic fantasy that emotion might survive where memory does not. But I think the film becomes weaker if we explain everything that way. Because if some hidden memory is secretly doing all the work, Eun-sae's present-day choices lose value. The more meaningful interpretation is the opposite. Perhaps she does not need subconscious recognition. Perhaps Tae-ha has to earn something new. That makes the romance harder and better. The woman he loved before and the woman who wakes in Taffy village may share the same body, instincts, and buried history. But present-day trust still requires present-day evidence, his patience, his choices, his willingness to protect without possessing, and eventually his ability to let her choose even when that choice might take her away from him. That reading has much stronger thematic support than mystical predestination. It transforms the story from true love survives amnesia into something more human. Love has to survive knowledge, because forgetting somebody is one test, remembering everything they hid from you is another. And that brings us to the interpretation I think holds up best. The real missing memory in our sticky love is not East Nazis. It is Tae-ha's idea of who he is allowed to become. He has spent years carrying a history that tells him what kind of man he is. Former boxer, gang member, enforcer, somebody who crossed lines he cannot uncross. Eun-sae loses her past unwillingly. Tae-ha cannot escape his even when he wants to. They therefore meet from opposite sides of memory. She needs enough history to know herself. He needs enough distance from history to imagine another self, and their relationship becomes the place where those journeys intersect. That is why the theories built directly from the film survive scrutiny better than elaborate hidden twist speculation. The evidence is not pointing toward a secret supernatural connection. It is pointing toward identity, choice, memory, and whether knowing somebody completely makes love easier or finally makes it real. That question opens the deepest compartment of all. Underneath the amnesia, the fake relationship, the village comedy, and the criminal pressure, our sticky love is really asking one uncomfortable question. How much of you belongs to your past? That question follows both Eun-sae and Tae-ha, but it approaches them from opposite directions. Eun-sae loses access to the person she used to be. Tae-ha remembers the person he used to be too clearly. She is frightened by an empty space. He is trapped by a full one. And the romance begins exactly where those two problems meet. Think about Eun-sae first. Memory normally gives us the illusion that identity is continuous. You wake up knowing your name. You remember yesterday. You remember the people you love. You remember mistakes you regret. All of those memories form a bridge between the person who went to sleep and the person opening their eyes the next morning. Eun-sae wakes without that bridge. Yet she does not become nobody. That is important. Her personality still pushes through. Her intelligence remains. Her stubbornness remains. Her instinct to question what does not make sense remains. Certain emotional reactions appear before she can explain them, so the series quietly separates identity from biography. Your biography is what happened to you. Your identity is also what you do with the moment in front of you, and that is why the name Go Eun-sae becomes much more interesting than a simple cover identity. At first, it is something placed on her, a constructed answer, her useful fiction designed to keep her hidden. But then she lives inside it. She creates memories under that name. She develops relationships. She experiences embarrassment, affection, fear, safety, anger, and belonging. Suddenly, something artificial begins producing authentic consequences. That is one of the deepest contradictions in the entire story. A false identity can still contain real experiences. And if the experiences are real, can the person created through them simply be dismissed when the truth returns? I do not think the series wants that answer to be yes. The stronger idea is that every version of ourselves leaves something behind. Think about your own life. You're not exactly the person you were 10 years ago. Maybe you would disagree with that person. Maybe you would dislike some of their decisions. Maybe the friendships, ambitions, fears, or beliefs that once defined you feel almost foreign now. Yet you do not say that person never existed. They remain part of you. Eun-sae experiences that distance in an extreme form. She gets to encounter her own history almost from the outside. And that gives the story a surprisingly human idea beneath its dramatic premise. Knowing who you are does not automatically tell you who you have to be. Tae-ha needs to learn the same lesson from the opposite direction. His history carries guilt, violence, compromise, choices that cannot simply be edited out because he wants a quieter life now. He does not receive the luxury of forgetting. Instead, he has to live with memory and decide whether memory is a sentence. That is the deeper symmetry between them. Eun-sae cannot remember enough to know herself. Tae-ha remembers too much to believe he can become someone else. She needs to reclaim the past without surrendering to it. He needs to accept the past without being imprisoned by it. And love becomes useful not because one person magically fixes the other. That would be much less interesting. Love becomes useful because each character gives the other evidence that change is possible. Eun-sae sees a Tae-ha whose present actions do not fit neatly inside the ugliest interpretation of his history. Tae-ha sees an Eun-sae capable of becoming more than the rigid identity her previous life may have built around her. Neither relationship with the past disappears. It becomes negotiable. That is where the recurring idea of stickiness becomes deeper. Taffy stretches. It changes shape, but the material remains connected. That is almost exactly how memory works in this story. The past can stretch far away from the present. You can change environment, change relationships, change your name, change your direction, but some connection remains. The mistake would be assuming that connection means destiny. It does not. Being attached to your past is not the same thing as being commanded by it. And being attached to another person is not automatically proof that the relationship is healthy or permanent. That distinction matters because the title sounds almost aggressively romantic. As sticky love. Stay together, never separate, destined forever. But the story becomes much more meaningful if sticky refers not to possession but consequence. Once you truly know another person, they leave residue. A conversation changes how you think. A betrayal changes what you trust. An act of kindness changes what you believe you deserve. A relationship can end and still continue influencing who you become. That is emotional stickiness. Eun-sae and Tae-ha do not simply become difficult to separate physically. They become part of each other's understanding of themselves. And that makes the central deception even more important. Because this is not really a story arguing that lying is acceptable when you love someone enough. If anything, its strongest thematic version argues the opposite. Love becomes real only when the other person is allowed to choose with the truth available. Before that, affection may exist, attachment may exist, chemistry may exist, but equality does not. That is why the return of agency matters more than the return of memory. Memory gives Eun-sae information. Agency determines what she does with it. She must eventually be free to look at Tae-ha without needing him to define reality for her. Only then can choosing him mean something. And Tae-ha must survive that uncertainty. He has to reach the point where protecting her no longer means controlling what she knows. That is growth. Early type protects through concealment. A more mature Tae-ha has to understand that real protection may mean telling the truth and accepting whatever choice follows. That is frightening because truth removes his advantage. But that is exactly why it matters. If someone chooses you only because you control the information available to them, you do not really know whether they chose you. Once they know everything, you finally find out. And that brings us back to the strange question we asked at the beginning. If you cannot remember loving someone, what is doing the remembering? Maybe the answer is nothing. Maybe that was the wrong question. Perhaps love does not need some mystical memory hidden in the body. Perhaps Eun-sae does not need to rediscover an old feeling buried somewhere inside herself. Perhaps two people can simply meet again under impossible circumstances and make a new choice. That is more powerful to me because destiny is easy. Choice is difficult. Destiny says these two people were always supposed to find each other. Choice says they discover everything that should make the relationship complicated and still have to decide whether they are willing to build something honest from what remains. That is the deeper layer of our sticky love. Not remembering love, rebuilding it, not escaping the past, deciding what authority the past deserves, not discovering your one true identity, accepting that you can contain several versions of yourself without any one of them owning the future. And perhaps that is why the little piece of taffy has followed us this far. Pull it apart and the connection stretches. Change its shape and it remains the same material. Let two pieces touch and separating them leaves evidence behind. People are not so different. We touch lives, we change shape, we carry residue. And even when the relationship begins in confusion, what matters eventually is whether the connection survives once both people can finally see clearly. That is the idea. Our sticky love leaves sitting underneath all the sweetness. And because this series is still so new, its final place in Korean television is impossible to declare yet. But even a brand new story enters a tradition. So before we open the first spoiler compartment, we need to ask what kind of legacy this series can realistically claim right now. And what would have to happen for that legacy to grow. There is one thing we absolutely cannot honestly say about our sticky love yet. We cannot call it influential. Not yet. The series premiered on Netflix on August 7, 2026. We are only days into its public life, and Netflix still presents it simply as its newly released romantic comedy starring Jung Hae-in and Ha-young. That matters because influence is something you prove backward. A later filmmaker references the work. Another series adopts one of its techniques. A performance becomes a model for a particular character type. A visual idea gets repeated. A genre shifts because something succeeded. Those connections require evidence. 5 days after release, none of that history exists yet. So rather than inventing a legacy for our sticky love, the more interesting question is what kind of legacy it has the potential to build. And the answer begins with something surprisingly small: the taffy. Korean romantic comedy has no shortage of memorable locations and objects, but our sticky love has made an unusually deliberate attempt to connect its title, setting, central relationship, and thematic mechanism through the same physical object. Director Kim Jang-han explicitly described the central romance as one that binds two people together, like sticky Korean taffy. While Netflix's promotional material places that metaphor directly inside Taffy Village rather than leaving it as an abstract title. If the series is remembered years from now, I suspect that specificity will matter, because genres survive through recognizable images. You may forget individual plot mechanics. You remember the lead umbrella, the seaside town, the bookstore, the rooftop, the particular food shared between two characters, the ordinary object that somehow becomes inseparable from a feeling. Our sticky love clearly wants Taffy to perform that function. Whether it succeeds culturally cannot be decided yet. But creatively, the attempt is already visible. The second thing worth watching is the way the series handles its romantic hero. Tae-ha belongs to a long tradition of Korean drama men carrying damaged histories, but he is not primarily packaged through corporate power, aristocratic status, celebrity, or extraordinary wealth. Netflix defines him simply as a boxing coach who claims to be Eun-sae's boyfriend, while its promotional campaign emphasizes the contrast between his rough exterior and the affection gradually developing between them. That does not revolutionize the genre, and we should not pretend it does, but it contributes to a continuing shift in what romantic fantasy can look like. The Hasabil is connected to becoming emotionally safer rather than socially more powerful. His dramatic journey matters because he has a past he needs to confront. The fantasy is redemption, not perfection, and opposite him, Eun-sae's appeal comes from refusing to become passive even when the entire premise places her in an extraordinarily vulnerable position. Netflix's own synopsis builds the comedy around the fact that this amnesiac prosecutor does not simply believe the stranger standing beside her. She questions him and struggles to accept the new reality being presented to her. That tension may eventually become one of the series' most important strengths when people reconsider it. Because amnesia romances can age badly when memory loss merely turns a woman into someone easier for the hero to control. Our sticky love at least understands that the ethical problem is part of the drama. Eun-sae's suspicion is necessary. Their secrecy must have consequences, and the romance only becomes emotionally convincing once choice begins replacing dependency. If that dimension continues to resonate with audiences, the series could be remembered less for its amnesia gimmick than for what it does after the gimmick has served its purpose. Then there is the genre mixture. Netflix deliberately launched Our Sticky Love as a romantic comedy whose rural warmth is interrupted by noir-style suspense and criminal danger. Again, that mixture itself is not unprecedented. Korean television has been combining romance with thrillers, mysteries, fantasy, legal drama, historical drama, and crime for years. So claiming that a sticky love changed genre television would be ridiculous this early. But influence does not always begin with invention. Sometimes it comes from combination. A familiar ingredient gets attached to another familiar ingredient in exactly the right proportions, and that particular formula becomes something later productions try to reproduce. That possibility exists here: a cozy rural romance with a high concept identity problem, an emotionally compromised protector, a competent heroine temporarily separated from the power associated with her old life. Village comedy, noir pressure, a tactile cultural motif binding all of it together. If future shows begin resembling that exact package, then we can start talking about influence. Until then, similarity would merely be similarity. The reputation question is even more open. Netflix currently identifies the series through broad descriptors such as quirky, romantic, comedic, amnesia driven, and secret filled. Those labels tell us how the platform positions it. They do not tell us what audiences will eventually remember. Maybe the crime story will dominate discussion. Maybe Jung Hae-in and Ha-young's chemistry becomes the reason people return. Maybe the taffy village atmosphere gives it comfort watch longevity. Maybe the central deception eventually becomes the part people debate most fiercely. Or perhaps it arrives, entertains its audience for a season, and quietly becomes one more enjoyable romance in an enormous streaming catalog. That possibility deserves to be acknowledged too. Not every good series changes television. It does not need to. Legacy is not a requirement for emotional value. A story can matter deeply to the people who find it without leaving a measurable footprint on the entire medium. So, what does it mean for television history that our sticky love exists? Right now, something modest but interesting. It is evidence of how comfortable globally distributed Korean television has become with cultural specificity and tonal hybridity. Netflix does not hide the Korean taffy metaphor when describing the show internationally. It places it at the center of the campaign. That tells us something about the environment the series entered. A local image can now be the global hook, and maybe that will ultimately be the most lasting thing about this box. Not that it invented romantic comedy, not that it reinvented amnesia, not that television before it had never combined romance and danger, but that it takes something culturally specific, something sticky, handmade, ordinary, and almost childish, and lets that one object carry an entire argument about memory, love, consequences, and the parts of other people that remain attached to us. Whether our sticky love becomes influential will take years to answer. Whether it leaves something behind emotionally, we can answer much sooner. Because now there is only one compartment left before the verdict, the one where we stop protecting the secrets. Where the lie, the memories, Daya's choices, Eun-sae's identity, and that first piece of taffy finally connect. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it, and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'll want to experience it fresh. And before we connect the final pieces, one accuracy note matters. Netflix's current official listing for our Sticky Love shows 10 episode, 10 as the last episode presently listed. So this breakdown treats that as the final officially available chapter rather than inventing additional episodes or scenes that Netflix itself does not currently list. Now return to the very first compartment. Eun-sae is not Eun-sae, she is Go Ji-won. Before the village, before the amnesia, before Tae-ha's fake boyfriend story. D1 is an ambitious anti-corruption prosecutor pursuing evidence against Baek Sang-gil and the supposedly legitimate empire hiding his criminal operation. Sang-gil discovers that she has become dangerous to him, and Ji-won is attacked badly enough to lose the autobiographical memory that once anchored her identity. Tae-ha, one of the men connected to Sang-gil's organization, is supposed to make sure she never becomes a problem again. Instead, he recognizes her and saves her. That is the first major reveal, and it changes the entire romance. Tae-ha did not coincidentally meet an amnesiac woman. He did not innocently misunderstand who she was. He knows. He understands why she is in danger. And when he appears at the hospital claiming that her name is Go Eun-sae and that he is her boyfriend, he is constructing an alternate life around a woman who cannot challenge him with her own memories. But here is the clue we have followed from the beginning. The lie saves her. And then the lie becomes dangerous for a completely different reason. Because feelings begin growing inside it. At first, Eun-sae responds exactly as the prosecutor buried inside her personality should. She investigates Tae-ha. His details do not line up. The village feels wrong. The supposedly shared home feels wrong. His description of their relationship feels wrong. Netflix's official episode descriptions deliberately structure episodes 2 and 3 around that suspicion before allowing Tae-ha's attempts to cheer her up to soften the distance between them. Then comes one of the most revealing early moments. Eun-sae tests their supposed romantic chemistry physically. What looks like a familiar romantic comedy beat becomes evidence gathering. She cannot search her memory, so she searches her reaction. That is the hidden mechanism of the entire series. Eun-sae keeps asking her present self to testify about a past she cannot access. And the problem is that the testimony starts becoming unexpectedly favorable to Tae-ha, not because his story becomes more truthful, because their present becomes more real. That distinction is everything. By the time Tae-ha is giving Eun-sae experiences designed simply to make her happy, the relationship has crossed the line neither one of them can easily reverse. He created the boyfriend role as camouflage. Now he begins emotionally inhabiting it. She entered the relationship because she had almost no alternatives. Now she begins participating in it voluntarily. The false story produces genuine memories. That is the first major twist that matters emotionally more than mechanically. The lie begins generating truth. But episode 4 opens the next compartment. Eun-sae reaches to her soul and begins discovering evidence about the woman she used to be, while Taya's painful history becomes harder to hide. Netflix's own episode summary explicitly frames this chapter around Eun-sae encountering an unpleasant truth about her former self and learning more about Taeha's past. And this is where the series revisits the easiest version of the amnesia fantasy. Ji-won's whole life is not simply a treasure waiting to be recovered. The woman Eun-sae discovers is ambitious, relentless, and shaped by a world very different from the village. That forces her to confront a strange possibility. Maybe losing herself also freed parts of herself. Jung herself described Ji-won as someone who had relentlessly chased achievement before memory loss separated her from those circumstances and allowed another, more vulnerable version of her to emerge through the care she receives from Tae-ha and the people around her. Now put that beside Tae-ha. His past travels in the opposite direction. Eun-sae wants hers back. Tae-ha wants his to stop controlling him. He was once a promising boxer before becoming entangled in Sang-gil's criminal organization, and the version of himself living quietly as a boxing coach is already an attempt at reinvention before Eun-sae ever enters the village. So the romance is secretly two identity stories crossing each other, she asks. Who was I? He asks, am I allowed to become someone else? And Sang-gil becomes a person determined to answer Tae-ha's question with no. That is why Sang-gil is more than a villain chasing the heroine. He represents the idea that history owns you. He has reinvented himself publicly as a respectable businessman while burying his own criminal identity, yet he refuses Tae-ha the same possibility of escape. Official character material described Sang-gil as having erased the traces of his gang past and created a respectable public identity while hunting Ji-won after learning the prosecutor he believed eliminated is alive. That hypocrisy is crucial. Sang-gil believes reinvention is a privilege available to the powerful. Taeha's entire journey rejects that. Then the village changes the stakes. Episodes 5 to 7 let the relationship become sweeter, allow Taeha's old connections to disturb their growing intimacy, and turn local misunderstandings into something more meaningful. When Eun-sae eventually disappears, the villagers search for her, while her doctor arrives with questions connecting her present life to the past Tae-ha has been trying to contain. The hidden detail here is not some object in the background, it is behavior. At the beginning, Eun-sae sees herself as someone stranded among strangers. By episode 7, those strangers respond to her absence as though something has been removed from their own lives. That is proof of transformation. Tae-ha invented Go Eun-sae, but he cannot claim ownership over who Go Eun-sae becomes. The village helps create her too. She acquires relationships independent of him. That is what makes his lie impossible to maintain indefinitely. Then episode 8 destroys the illusion of safety. Sang-gil finally understands what Tae-ha has done. Netflix's synopsis makes the consequence explicit. Eun-sae's life is in danger, and Tae-ha begins planning to help her escape. This is where Tae-ha's love is finally forced to change shape. At the beginning, saving her means keeping her close. He creates the fake relationship. He controls the information. He surrounds her with an identity he believes will keep her hidden. But once Sang-gil closes in, protection starts requiring the opposite distance. Tae-ha has to consider losing the very person whose presence gave his new life meaning. That is the point where the boyfriend life begins turning into actual love. Not because he finally gets the girl, because he becomes willing to give up access to her if that is what her survival requires. And then episode 9 delivers the twist. The entire premise has been delaying. Her memories return. Netflix confirms it directly. With her memories restored, Eun-sae turns her attention toward pursuing Sang-gil, even though her continued presence now endangers Tae-ha and the village as well. This is the moment the original sticky love premise ends. The amnesiac woman is gone. Go Ji-won knows who she is. And suddenly, Tae loses the advantage around which their entire relationship was constructed. He can no longer define her past. He can no longer pretend the cover identity is reality. She knows what happened. She knows what she was. She knows enough to return to the fight she began before the attack. And this is why the memory recovery is not actually the climax. It is the test. Because now Ji-won can finally judge Tae-ha with both identities available to her. She has the prosecutor's past. She has Eun-sae's village memories. She knows the deception. She also knows the man she encountered inside it. That is the real meaning of the restored memory. It does not erase Eun-sae. It combines her with Ji-won. The woman who returns is carrying both lives. And the final officially listed episode makes the consequence beautifully mundane. Episode 10 does not reduce everything to the question of whether she remembers Tae-ha. Netflix describes Ji-won Eun-sae as consumed with the work of putting Sang-gil away, while Tae-ha begins wondering whether there is any space left for him in the life she has reclaimed. That is exactly the final romantic problem the story needs. When she was lost, she needed him. When she was hunted, she needed protection. When she believed the fake relationship circumstance kept them close. Now she has work, identity, purpose, memory, agency. So Tae-ha has to confront the question every artificial romantic setup eventually avoids. Would she choose him if nothing forced her to? That is the ending's deepest meaning. The series begins with Tae-ha choosing for Eun-sae. It arrives at a point where only Eun-sae's free choice can validate anything between them. And this is also where we need to draw a firm line between verified ending information and invention. Netflix's currently published episode 10 description confirms Eun-sae's renewed pursuit of Sang-gil and Tae-ha's uncertainty about whether he still belongs in her restored life. But the official public episode text does not provide a detailed scene-by-scene account of Sang-gil's ultimate legal fate or spell out every final romantic beat. So I am not going to manufacture a final arrest scene, a proposal, a wedding, a post-credits surprise, or some secret episode 11 revelation just because those would make a conventional ending easier to narrate. The verified conclusion already gives us the important answer. Eun-sae remembers. She resumes her fight. Tae-ha can no longer hide behind the role invented, and the relationship has to survive as a choice rather than a necessity. There is no verified post-credit scene listed in the official episode material I could substantiate, so there is nothing responsible to invent there either. And now the taffy finally makes sense. At the beginning, we thought stickiness meant these two people could not escape each other. That was only half the image. The real point is that separation does not restore the original shape. Ji-won can recover her memories. She cannot erase Eun-sae. Tae can leave Sang-gil's world. He cannot pretend that history never happened. The fake relationship can be exposed. It cannot erase the authentic experiences created inside it. Pull the pieces apart and something remains. Residue, evidence, change. That is what our sticky love ultimately leaves behind for me. Not the fantasy that love survives because two people are magically destined for each other. something harder. Love becomes worth believing only when the lie is no longer necessary, when memory returns, when dependency ends, when both people can finally see the complete box and one of them still reaches toward the other anyway. That is when the stickiness stops being a trap and becomes a choice. So, after opening every compartment of our sticky love, where does the box finally land? For me, this is a 7 out of 10. And that rating feels right because the series succeeds most when it stops treating its amnesia premise as a gimmick and starts using it to ask something more difficult about trust. At its simplest, this is a warm, romantic comedy about an unlikely pair forced into an absurd situation. At its best, it becomes a story about two people trying to escape different versions of the past. Eun-sae loses hers and has to decide which pieces deserve to return with her. Tae-ha remembers his and has to decide whether those memories have the right to determine everything he becomes next. Put those journeys together, and the romance has genuine emotional weight. Jung Hae-in gives Tae-ha exactly the restraint the character needs. The performance works because he never makes the character's affection erase his uneasiness. You can feel that Tae-ha is constantly balancing what he wants with what he knows he should do. Ha-hyang is just as important. Her Eun-sae remains like an hyena's even when almost everything recognizable about her life has disappeared. Her suspicion, confidence, irritation, intelligence, and comic reactions stop the character from becoming a passive passenger to her own story. And when those two performances meet, the series finds its strongest weapon: chemistry. Not perfect chemistry, not effortless chemistry, combative chemistry. Their relationship is most entertaining when neither person knows exactly what category the other belongs in. Boyfriend, liar, protector, problem, first love, partner, home. The labels keep changing, and the uncertainty keeps the relationship moving. I also love the decision to build so much of the series around Taffy Village. That could easily have been nothing more than a cute location. Instead, it gives our sticky love a visual identity and provides the metaphor that follows the entire story. The taffy starts as a joke, then it becomes romance, eventually it becomes consequence. Two lives touch, you pull them apart, neither returns completely unchanged. That is a much better use of a title motif than simply mentioning it once and forgetting about it. But a 7 also means there are problems. The biggest one is that Taya's original deception deserves more emotional weight than the series always gives it. Protecting Eun-sae explains his decision. It does not automatically erase the fact that he constructs an intimate relationship around someone who cannot verify her own history. The story is more interesting whenever it acknowledges that discomfort. It becomes more conventional whenever sweetness is used to make the complication disappear. The tonal balance is uneven too. The criminal material sometimes feels genuinely threatening. At other moments, the series races back toward romantic comedy before the danger has fully landed. And some of the supporting characters function more effectively as parts of the village mechanism than as fully developed individuals. So, no, I would not call our sticky love flawless, but I would absolutely call it charming. And more importantly, specific. You should watch this if you enjoy Korean romances built around opposites, attracting hidden histories, forced proximity, small town warmth, bickering chemistry, and a mystery running underneath the love story. If you love watching two people slowly realize that the relationship they did not choose has become something they may willingly choose, there is a lot here for you. You should also give it a chance if you enjoy romantic leads who carry moral complications rather than arriving perfectly assembled. But if amnesia stories frustrate you immediately, this will probably test your patience. If fabricated relationship setups make it difficult for you to invest romantically, the central mechanism may create more discomfort than charm. And if you are coming primarily for a hard crime thriller because of the noir elements, understand that romance remains the emotional center. This is not a gangster drama occasionally stopping for love. It is a romantic comedy allowing danger to place pressure on love. As for where I would watch it, this feels completely at home on streaming. The village atmosphere, episodic romantic progression, mysteries, and cliffhanger rhythm make it the kind of story that naturally invites another episode when you plan to stop. I do not need spectacle from our sticky love. I need time with the characters, time for suspicion to become familiarity, time for familiarity to become affection, and time for affection to survive the arrival of truth, because that is ultimately where the entire box leads. Tae begins by giving Eun-sae an identity. The story becomes meaningful when he no longer gets to decide what she does with it. Eun-sae begins by searching for proof that this strange man belongs in her life. The story becomes meaningful when she finally possesses enough truth to make that judgment herself. And perhaps that is the simplest reason I landed on 7. I enjoyed the sweetness. I enjoyed the fiction. I enjoyed the central performances. I wanted the darker consequences to cut slightly deeper, but when the box closes, the idea remains. You can recover your memories without recovering exactly the person you used to be. You can confront a terrible past without surrendering your entire future to it. And sometimes the strongest relationships are not the ones destiny guarantees. They are the ones two people choose after the illusions are gone. The lie created the relationship. The truth decides whether it deserves to survive. Every film is a box, and we opened this one together. And with that, our sticky love box is finally closed. Thank you for staying with me all the way from that first sticky piece of taffy, through Eun-sae's missing memories, Tae-ha's secrets, the village warmth, the danger underneath it, and finally the question hiding beneath the entire romance. If you enjoyed opening this one with me, leave a like and subscribe to the Film Box. It genuinely helps this channel keep making deep breakdowns where we can move beyond simply asking whether something was good or bad and start asking why it worked, what it was really trying to say, and which details become completely different once you connect them. And I want your answer to one question in the comments. If you were Eun-sae and you discovered that someone had lied about being your partner in order to protect you, but you had genuinely fallen in love with that person during the lie, could you still choose them once you knew the truth? Not whether Tae-ha deserved forgiveness according to the script. What would you do? Because that is where this story becomes more interesting than romance. It becomes a question about whether good intentions can repair broken trust, and whether a relationship created under false circumstances can eventually become honest enough to deserve a future. I will be down in the comments reading your interpretations, especially if you saw the taffy metaphor differently or noticed another clue that changes how you understand Eun-sae and Tae-ha. Until we open the next box, thank you for spending this time with the Film Box. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.